I'm going to start. I'd like to call the hearing to order this morning, and I'd like to recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. This morning, we're going to be conducting an oversight hearing on the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011 and its implementation of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. I certainly want to welcome the interim executive director of PHMSA, as well as a second panel that includes representatives of the oil and natural gas industry, local government, and witnesses with other perspectives. It's been more than 3 years since the Pipeline Safety Act was enacted, and PHMSA's implementation has not been satisfactory. Many of the mandates, at least 17 out of 42 included in the Pipeline Safety Act, have not been completed, including several described as key mandates with potentially large impacts on pipeline operations nationwide. The potential consequences of these delays are serious. In May, a significant oil spill occurred in Santa Barbara, California, and just days ago, the same company reported another incident in Illinois. The committee has written letters both to PHMSA and this company seeking more information. It cannot be said for certain that full implementation of the Pipeline Safety Act would have made a difference in Santa Barbara or any other individual oil spill or natural gas pipeline explosion. Nonetheless, we owe it to the American people to ensure that all reasonable steps are taken to ensure the safety of the nation's pipelines. The Pipeline Safety Act includes a number of such steps that have yet to be put into action. The increase in domestic oil and natural gas production is clearly good news, but it does present significant infrastructure challenges. Whether it's oil, refined products, or natural gas, there is inherent risk in moving high volumes of product through aging and sometimes inadequate infrastructure. Part of the answer lies in constructing new pipelines and replacing old ones. But perhaps even more important is applying new technology to ensure the safety of the existing system. Many experts believe that pipelines are the safest means of transporting natural gas and liquid hydrocarbons. But the Santa Barbara spill and other recent incidents underscore the fact that there is considerable room for improvement. It is important to understand why the timely implementation of the Pipeline Safety Act has proven so difficult, and particularly since more money has been given to PHMSA, and we'd like to know how PHMSA can expedite this matter. And as we begin to look ahead to reauthorization of this same statute, we're also interested in learning about PHMSA's priorities and if additional legislative steps should be taken. We have 2 panels of witnesses this morning, and I'll be introducing them right before they give their opening statement. This time I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important and timely hearing today on the issue of pipeline safety oversight. Mr. Chairman, in the past, the issue of pipeline safety has been one that we have worked on in a bipartisan manner, and it is my hope and my expectation that we will continue to work on this important matter in the same tradition as we address this very, very important issue in this Congress. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, the issue of pipeline safety too often takes a back seat to other pressing matters until there is an accident or there is a tragedy that focuses the public's attention back on this issue. Of course, today's hearings take place against the backdrop of the major Santa Barbara pipeline breach that spilled 100,000 gallons of crude oil in May, polluting the Pacific Ocean, damaging Southern California beaches, and killing hundreds of thousands of wildlife. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, Just over the weekend, there was another smaller but no less troubling spill in my home state of Illinois from a station operated by the Plains All American, the very same company that owned the California pipeline that ruptured just 2 months ago. 2 ruptures in 2 months, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, while this subcommittee continues to debate issues such as fast-tracking the pipeline permitting process, I think that it is imperative that we also examine the safety mechanism we currently have in place to ensure that they are working effectively, and whether there are deficiencies in areas of resources or leadership. I believe that there's much more work to be done in order for Americans to feel a greater sense of confidence in the agencies that are responsible for pipeline safety oversight. Once again, Mr. Chairman, I applaud you for holding this timely hearing today, and I look forward to hearing from all of our expert witnesses. And with that, I yield back. I yield to Ms. Capps for one time I have left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Mr. Rush, for holding this hearing and giving me the opportunity to provide an opening statement. I want to thank Chairman Upton and Ranking Member Pallone for strong leadership within our committee on these issues and for working with me to incorporate oversight of the recent oil spill in my district into this hearing. And I want to welcome my constituent, Diane Black, from the County of Santa Barbara, who will be testifying on the second panel today. And as was already mentioned, nearly 2 months ago, over 100,000 gallons of crude oil spilled from the ruptured Plains All American pipeline into the coastline of my district. The oil gushed from the ruptured pipeline, flowed down a hill, through a culvert onto the beach and into the ocean along the pristine Gaviota coast. From there, tens of thousands of gallons of oil spread for miles down the coast, closing popular beaches, valuable fisheries, devastating wildlife, and breaking back horrible memories of the Platform A disaster more than 45 years ago. Since that devastating oil spill in 1969, the Santa Barbara community has dedicated itself to learning from that tragedy and working to ensure that it does not happen again. Sadly, even in a community as determined as ours, May 19th reminded us that spills are inevitable as long as we continue to depend on oil for for so much of our energy needs. I know the Plains spill in my district certainly is not the first pipeline failure, nor will it be the last. Time and time again, we've seen oil and gas pipelines fail, causing irreparable harm to lives, property, and the environment. Just last Friday, as was mentioned as well, we saw yet another oil spill in Illinois from a Plains pipeline, the very same company responsible for the spill in my district. These spills remind us that we have a responsibility to do everything we can to prevent spills from happening, but also to be prepared to minimize the damage when they do occur. That's why today's hearing and our work to reauthorize federal pipeline safety programs are so important. As a result of the Plains spill in my district, we have already gained valuable insights and identified weaknesses that must be addressed. I want to thank Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Pallone, for working with me to fully investigate this bill, ensure this administration is following through on its overdue pipeline safety reforms. Over the years, regardless of who is in the White House, federal pipeline regulation has been weak and ineffective. There is a reason that the company that built the pipeline that ruptured in my district sued in 1998 to have it be regulated by the federal government rather than the county of Santa Barbara. They knew federal regulators would ask fewer questions, impose fewer restrictions. This cannot be allowed to continue. I recognize progress has been made in recent years. We still have a long way to go. While PHMSA has certainly dragged its feet in implementing key reforms, Congress has also failed to provide the agency with the resources it needs to meet the growing demand. I often hear many of my colleagues tout efforts to support the rapid growth in domestic oil and gas development and pipeline construction in recent years. While I don't share necessarily their enthusiasm for this development, I hope we can all agree that we must also support efforts to ensure federal regulators have the resources they need to keep pace with this growth. We simply can't have one without the other. Mr. Chairman, these are just a few of many issues I hope this committee can examine closely as we work to reauthorize pipeline safety programs. These issues have traditionally been very strongly bipartisan. I hope that continues throughout this process, and I apologize for going way over Mr. Rush's time, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. At this time, recognize the gentleman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today, this subcommittee returns to the very important issue of pipeline safety, and I welcome the interim executive director, Stacy Cummings, of the pipeline and of PHMSA to this hearing, and I look forward to the prompt confirmation of a permanent administrator as much work needs to be done in the months ahead. This committee has a long bipartisan history on pipeline safety issues, including passage of the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011, Upton-Dingell. That law held particular significance to me as it came in the aftermath of a serious oil spill in a tributary of the Kalamazoo River just outside of my district in Michigan. Following the spill, I worked closely with my friend John Dingell on a bipartisan basis, as we also worked closely with our friends on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to get the Pipeline Safety Act on the books, signed by President Obama. The law contains numerous provisions designed to reduce the likelihood of similar pipeline spills and minimize the impact of those when they do occur. However, the Pipeline Safety Act will not achieve its primary objectives until it's fully implemented, and I'm most disappointed that more than a third of the requirements remain incomplete long after congressionally mandated deadlines have passed. This includes several of the law's most important mandates, such as automatic and remote control shutoff valves, leak detection, accident and incident notification, excess flow valves, and maximum allowable operating pressure. Some of these provisions, I am convinced, would have made a difference in the recent oil spill in Santa Barbara had they been implemented by PHMSA in a timely manner. In the last couple of days, PHMSA has announced proposals for 2 of these overdue mandates, and while these late steps are certainly in the right direction, there is no question that something needs to change with the way that PHMSA is implementing the Pipeline Safety Act. I intend to ask questions to find out what more Congress can do to speed up the implementation of those requirements. The urgency for pipeline safety is greater than ever. With record levels of natural gas and liquid hydrocarbons being produced in this country and throughout North America, the volumes traversing pipelines are setting records. And although pipelines are among the safest means of transport, the Santa Barbara spill is a harsh reminder that rigorous, risk-based enforcement needs to be a priority. This committee takes pipeline safety very seriously. That's why we insist that new pipelines be built with state-of-the-art safety features. It's also why we passed the Pipeline Safety Act to improve the safety of the 2.5 million miles of existing pipelines throughout the country. This includes many old and potentially vulnerable pipelines, such as the one that carries oil between the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula through the Straits of Mackinac in Michigan. I think we can all agree that it is much, much better to be in a position to prevent accidents before they happen rather than to respond after they occur. In the last hour, the state of Michigan released its own report on pipeline safety, including specific recommendation on the Straits pipelines, as well as other steps that can be taken to improve safety, including a better relationship between the state and PHMSA. I look forward to studying the report and commend the state for its commitment to pipeline safety. As we look ahead to continued implementation of the pipeline safety and to the law's reauthorization, we'll insist on greatly improved performance from PHMSA, and this hearing is certainly an important step towards getting us to where we need to be. And I'll yield a minute if any of my side wants a minute. If not, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman yields back the balance of his time. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Plone, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you and Mr. Rush holding this long overdue oversight hearing on the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act. The vast network of transmission pipelines in this country are considered by most Americans as out of sight and out of mind. But when something goes wrong, the presence of these facilities can make themselves known in the most devastating and sometimes deadly ways. Unfortunately, there are one too many examples of this since 2010, first in San Bruno, California, then in Marshall, Michigan, and most recently in Santa Barbara. There, the rupture of a Plains All-American pipeline spilled over 100,000 gallons of crude oil onto the coastline. And I'm no stranger to the damage that can be caused by pipeline failures. 21 years ago, a pipeline exploded in my district in Edison, New Jersey, destroying around 300 homes, melting cars, and lighting up the sky from New York to Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, that loud and powerful explosion was met with a staggering level of inaction by the Department of Transportation's Office of Pipeline Safety and its parent organization, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. 2 decades and 4 reauthorizations later, PHMSA has made little progress. The shortfalls of the agency have drawn the attention of industry and safety advocates alike, as well as Democrats and Republicans. I'm deeply concerned about PHMSA's inability to carry out its mission, numerous safety recommendations, or congressional mandates. Almost 5 years after the last reauthorization, it's especially troubling how many mandates that have yet to be implemented by the agency. Many of the outstanding requirements are critically important to safety, such as those dealing with operating pressure, leak detection, and automatic or remote-controlled shutoff valves. The lack of inaction on automatic and remote-controlled shutoff valves is particularly galling, considering the NTSB recommended expanded use of these damage prevention technologies 20 years ago. I remember that during the whole New Durham explosion, again in my district in Edison. Even more troubling is the discovery that OMB is also to blame. Last night, the committee inadvertently received a version of PHMSA's testimony that had been marked up by OMB, and OMB's comments clearly show concern over being called out over this outrageous delay, asking whether PHMSA has a, quote, planned response to a question about why this rule has been under EO 12866 review so long. If so, could you provide a summary of that response? Unquote. Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, we need to get OMB up here to explain to the American people and this committee as to why they've held up these proposed rules for so long. Progress must finally be made to help ensure the safety of our pipeline system, and I hope that this hearing leads to that. I'm about to yield, Mr. Chairman, but I just want to say, you know, I was first elected to Congress not long before that explosion in Edison, and we were very fortunate that I think one person had a heart attack and lost their life because of the explosion, but there wasn't anybody who directly was impacted, although obviously that person was who had the heart attack. And for several years after that, you know, we made a number of recommendations, including the remote shutoff valves. But I really feel like, you know, there's a lot of hoopla when these explosions or tragedies occur, but then not much happens afterwards in terms of preventing them again. So hopefully we'll get something out of this hearing today in the committee's action. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and that concludes the opening statement. So on our first panel, we have one person, and that's Ms. Stacy Cummings, who's the Interim Executive Director for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. So, Ms. Cummings, if you would come forward, and you'll be recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement. And at the end of that time, we'll give members an opportunity to ask you some questions. So thank you very much for being with us, and be sure to get your microphone up close and turn it on, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for that introduction. Chairman Upton, Ranking Member Pallone, Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's progress in implementing the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011. And thank you for providing PHMSA with the tools we need to execute our pipeline safety mission. My name is Stacy Cummings. I'm the Interim Executive Director of PHMSA. In May, I traveled to the site of the Plains pipeline oil spill in Santa Barbara, witnessing for myself its effect on the environment and nearby communities. The spill disrupted businesses, threatened wildlife, and impacted local residents and tourism. This spill was unacceptable, and Americans deserve to be confident that the pipelines in their communities are operating safely. What I saw in Santa Barbara as well was PHMSA's rapid and comprehensive response to the spill. Immediately following notification, PHMSA personnel were on the scene, where we remain actively involved now. Our inspectors continue to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the cause of this failure, and we continue to support the Unified Command's spill response efforts led by the Coast Guard and EPA. PHMSA quickly issued a corrective action order to Plains Pipeline, and the affected pipeline remains shut down under our authority. We will make sure that the operator identifies the root cause of the failure and mitigates any additional risks before we allow them to restart that pipeline. I was very impressed by our PHMSA team in the Western region, as well as throughout the country. It is truly an honor to lead a workforce so clearly dedicated to its safety mission. Here in Washington, PHMSA continues to take action to successfully meet the requirements of each mandate in the Pipeline Safety Act. I speak for the entire agency when I say that we share your concern and sense of urgency. We are committed to satisfying every mandate. The rulemaking process is methodical, inclusive, and transparent. It enables PHMSA to fully consider stakeholder input. In the past month, PHMSA has welcomed new executive leadership, and with the support of the Office of Management and Budget, we have issued 2 proposed rules and 1 final rule. Those rules address 3 mandates from the Pipeline Safety Act and 5 NTSB recommendations. We continue to work to advance significant rulemakings on natural gas and hazardous liquid pipelines. These proposed rules are anticipated to be published by the end of this year. But rulemaking is not the only tool that PHMSA uses to improve pipeline safety. As we saw in Santa Barbara, pipeline failures don't wait on the rulemaking process, and neither will PHMSA. We are first and foremost a safety agency. We execute our mission on several fronts with one goal in mind: to drive down the pipeline failure rate to 0. In addition to developing safety regulations, we focus on reducing risk by reaching out to the regulated community to ensure that they both understand and comply with federal safety regulations. We conduct integrated inspections, we hold operators accountable through enforcement, we provide grants to our local and state pipeline safety partners, and we also fund research to develop innovative safety solutions. For these reasons, pipeline failures are low probability events, even as risk factors increase. Unfortunately, when pipeline failures do occur, they can be fatal and costly. At PHMSA, we think that one pipeline failure is one too many. PHMSA was founded just 10 years ago, and yet so much has changed since then. Our nation's energy supply and transportation pipeline network continue to grow exponentially. These changes mark tremendous opportunities for our nation and provide an opportunity for PHMSA to evolve with the industry we regulate. Whether it's through smarter data or funding research for better detection technology, PHMSA will weigh and act on a range of options for implementing innovative pipeline safety solutions. PHMSA is committed to working with this committee to ensure that we are well positioned to adapt to a modern and evolving infrastructure. Americans deserve to be confident that PHMSA is protecting people and the environment. We take this charge very seriously. Again, thank you for your support. I look forward to answering your questions.
Ms. Cummings, thank you very much, and I'm going to defer my questions, but I'm going to recognize at this time Mr. Olson of Texas for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and welcome Director Cummings. It's always great to have someone who served in our Navy as the daughter of a career naval officer. My home state of Texas is no stranger to pipelines. According to EIA, we have nearly 60,000 miles of gas pipelines. Oil lines cover the state as well. They are vital to our economy, to the nation's economy, as they carry the products that keep America moving. It's not just oil and gas and pipelines. Water pipelines can blow out as well. We saw that last year when Sunset Boulevard became Sunset River. A 93-year-old pipeline blew out, sending 20 million gallons of water all over the campus of UCLA. We know that pipelines are the safest way to move oil and gas. But just like airplanes, when the worst happens, it can be tragic. People can be killed. 8 people lost their lives in San Bruno. 8 people in their homes. And that's why we should always keep moving forward with pipeline safety. It seems clear that PHMSA was never going to make our deadlines that we imposed with the most recent pipeline safety bill. And when PHMSA has a long list of new rules to write, do you try to triage them and focus on the ones that are more important to keeping people safe? How are you working through that list?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. Yes, we had 42 mandates in the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act, of which we've completed 26. We are working on every single one of those 42 mandates. And in the case of the mandates that are going to be addressed through rulemakings, we haven't been waiting on the rulemaking process to get information out to our stakeholders, to the industry, and to the public. We have sanctioned studies, and we've issued reports to Congress. We have held public meetings and workshops. We've issued advance notices of proposed rulemaking to help us gather stakeholder data. And in some cases, we have proposed rules that we've issued, like the 2 that we were able to issue in the last month. Those are all very important ways that we get information out to the stakeholders and to industry as we continue to work to fulfill the remainder of the 42 mandates. Again, many of them with formal rules that we're in process working on.
So 42, 26 down, 16 to go, if my math is right. And keep working hard on that.
We will.
My second question, I hope to ask this to the second panel as well. If I call the City Hall in the village of Pleak, back home in Texas, and ask Mayor Bittner or Fire Chief Gania, has PHMSA reached out to you about pipeline safety? What do you think they'll say? Or put another way, how much have you done outreach to the first responders and leaders in our local communities?
I hope that what he will say is yes, absolutely. PHMSA has reached out. We reach out to our stakeholders in many ways. I mentioned a couple of them being public meetings and workshops. We partner with the first responder community to make sure that they have access to training. We also have several grants. About 1/3 of our budget goes to grants. And some of those grants are technical assistance grants where the mayor or the first responder community can actually apply for a grant with PHMSA to get technical assistance to provide training, to do outreach to the public, to invest in equipment that's going to help them respond to a pipeline accident if it were to occur. So there are many opportunities for stakeholders such as your mayor and the first responder community to interact with PHMSA and for us to help them be prepared.
I'll check with them to confirm those. Great, thanks for that answer. Final question. You've always kept the focus on risk-based standards over the years, and that's appropriate. But how does this risk-based standards agenda move forward, evolve with these new rulemakings?
One of the most important changes to the pipeline safety program over the last 10 to 15 years has been our implementation of integrity management. Integrity management is a risk-based approach where we require the operator to identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with their specific pipeline. The operator is in the best position to understand the uniqueness of their location, the condition of their pipeline, as well as what is moving through their pipeline. And so our program for integrity management is our risk-based approach, and we are going to continue to improve it, enhance it, and expand it through the rulemakings that you're going to see proposed over the next year.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Yield back.
This time recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Cummings, I really want to thank you so much for being here today with us, and I know your job is not an easy one, and you're the interim executive director, and I enjoyed our discussions, recent discussions, and I'd like to, before I begin, if you would give me an update on the pipeline leak that happened on Friday near Highland, Illinois. Is the spill contained? And I've heard that the oil has reached a tributary of Silver Lake, which serves as the water supply for the citizens of Highland. I'd like to know if the water supply is safe, has it been affected, and give me an update, if you will, on the cleanup efforts that that PHMSA is conducting there or overseeing there near Highland, Illinois.
Happy to, and thank you for the question. On Friday in Pocahontas, Illinois, a pipeline fitting at a pump station blew out, discharging about 100 barrels of crude onto the ground. The spill did migrate down a ditch into a creek, as you mentioned, and it did threaten the water source. It was heading in the direction of a reservoir that held a water source for Highland, Illinois. We were notified of the spill through the National Response Center, which is the appropriate way to be notified. We immediately sent a PHMSA investigator to be on the scene, and that investigator was on the scene by 4 p.m. that very day. An incident command center was set up. The state of Illinois had the lead on that. And what they did was they managed the response. They immediately went in to stop the flow of oil, and they were able to stop the flow of oil before it got to the point where it threatened the water source. So, as was confirmed to me yesterday through an update from our team, the water source oil did not get into the water source, into that reservoir. The cleanup effort did work. They used booms, and then for the past several days, they've been using different methods to recover the oil, and they're in the process of continuing to do that. I can get you a very, very specific update in writing for the record if you'd like, but I would like to point out that this was Plains Pipeline, which is the same operator from the Santa Barbara spill. Today, we are issuing a corrective action order to Plains, specifically related to this spill in Illinois. And I sent a letter yesterday to the CEO of Plains Pipeline, and he and his team are going to be here in DC at PHMSA, and we're going to talk to them on Friday about their safety record, safety culture, and what they're doing to address these two issues, but also the safety of their entire system.
In your opinion, do most mayors, county executives, local leaders even know what pipelines are in their jurisdictions and what those pipelines are carrying? And if they wanted to obtain this information, can they get it from PHMSA?
Yes, we have an online tool called the National Pipeline Mapping System, NPMS. That tool in its entirety is limited in access, but what we do is we have individual access for people based on the information that they need to know. So a local executive, a local emergency responder, or a state level emergency responder or executive would have the ability to apply for a password, and then they would have role-based access to the information that they need to identify what pipelines are in their area. And if anybody needs any help accessing that or getting access, we'd be happy to provide that assistance.
Most people, most citizens of my state would really be surprised to know the number of pipelines, the enormous amount of pipelines that are located in the state of Illinois. Do you have any idea about the percentage of the nation's pipelines that go through the state of Illinois?
I think you asked the percentage of the 2.6 million?
Yes.
No, I can't tell you the exact percentage. I can absolutely get you that for the record. But I agree with you. There are many pipelines in the state of Illinois that we regulate as well as that are regulated by the state.
Yeah, I was told, Mr. Chairman, that in one part of my district, Will County, 1/8 of the state's entire pipelines go through this little small quadrant of my district in the state of Illinois. I want to thank you again, Ms. Cummins, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
This time I recognize the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes.
Well, again, appreciate the hearing, and as I indicated in my statement, there's a number of us that are not happy with the failure to really implement a number of the issues that were signed into law a number of years ago. Literally about a third, as we calculate, a third of some of those regulations. So I guess I have a question as we look to reauthorizing this bill, which, as you know, expires the end of September. Should we be providing more direction to PHMSA to prioritize the outstanding mandates, or should we allow PHMSA to finalize the regs required by the 2011 law before determining what if changes need to be made? What's your suggested course?
We do have significant progress that we've made on the mandates over and above the ones that we have completed, and we do appreciate your patience in completing those mandates. Every single one of them is critical and important for pipeline safety. Each one of those mandates are as important to PHMSA as they are to you, and we have a plan moving forward to complete them. We do think that during the reauthorization process, we'd like to sit down with the committee staff. We'd like to sit down with you, talk about specific ways that we can use reauthorization to help us expand pipeline safety, improve pipeline safety. But we do recognize that we have a lot of work to do, and we are very, very focused on it, and we have a plan to complete every one of these mandates.
So one of the easiest ones in my book to implement was the change that we did that a company had to report formally on a timely basis, and we changed that to say it had to be within an hour. We looked at the Santa Barbara spill a couple weeks ago, and that spill, as I understand it, from talking to Lois Capps, went on for many, many hours. I mean, how is it not easy to say it's got to be done within 1 hour, and it, doesn't happen? Here we are 4 years later. I mean, that was one of the big issues that we had in the Kalamazoo River spill in Calhoun County back in 2010. A company, they did know that it was going on, but they didn't report it until even perhaps a couple days later. $1 billion in cleanup.
PHMSA agrees that timely notification is absolutely critical, because the sooner we begin response in the rare but unfortunate circumstance of a pipeline rupture. Earlier this month, we issued a proposed rule that will require operators to notify as soon as practicable, but not more than 1 hour after they've detected a release, to the National Response Center. So we're proud to have gotten that proposed rule issued. It was issued earlier this month.
But why did it take so long? I mean, that was the intent. I mean, that was what we discussed. I mean, it was in black and white. And 4 years, I mean, is OMB that slow? Do I need to go back to Sylvia Burwell when she was there to
I understand and I sense your frustration that it's taken us this long to have the proposed rule out, but I would like to point out that we've issued multiple safety advisories, and we have shared with the industry how critical it is for timely notification. As we execute the investigation into the incident at Santa Barbara and also in Illinois, we are absolutely going to be looking at timelines and notification as part of our corrective action order, and we do expect operators to be notifying the NRC as soon as possible so that they can begin that cleanup.
Okay, let me ask one last question in my remaining minute. In the current integrity management program for inspecting for oil and gas pipelines, is there a priority for increased inspections or shutoff valves on pipelines that are over 30 years old? So not new ones, but the ones that were laid more than 30 years ago, or more than a mile underwater. So I look at the difference between in the Straits of Mackinac, it's more than a mile. I look at the Chesapeake Bay. I'm not sure if there's pipelines there or not. I look at pipelines that are going out in the ocean. Is there any regulations that are pending or that you're reviewing that would look at existing pipelines of somewhat older nature in certainly environmentally sensitive area? And if not, should we be looking at those here as we look to reauthorize the bill?
I'm going to ask if I can respond to you on the record on that specific question on whether or not that's in the regs now or the regs that we're planning.
You think that's a good idea, that we do that?
I think that a risk-based approach looks at probability and consequence, and that we should be looking at everything that impacts the probability of a pipeline failure as well as the consequence. So proximity to water as well as age impact both likelihood and consequence. So those sound like intriguing ideas, but I would definitely like to talk to the technical experts before providing you with a specific.
I look forward to your response.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yield back.
This time, Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Cummings, for testifying this morning. I'd like to know a little bit about how you prioritize your inspections. Is there a way for you to determine what pipelines are most at risk? And could you explain that a little, please?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We prioritize our inspections using a risk model driven by data. And so we have about 26 different elements that look at the condition of the pipe, the age of the pipe, what's being moved in the pipe, as well as past performance and what information we have learned through the inspections that we've already provided. And we use that information and put it into an algorithm, and that algorithm gives us basically advice on which pipelines companies, which operators we should be inspecting. We then have our regional directors who are experts and who really know the system, use that information as input to create their annual plan to make sure that we are visiting those pipeline operators that are higher risk more frequently,
Okay.
and to make sure that we're
So how much transparency does that algorithm have? Is that something that's publicly available?
I'm not sure that it's publicly available, but I would be happy to schedule a briefing with you or your staff to go over that algorithm and how we use it.
Okay, that might be a good idea.
Sure.
Is PHMSA moving forward with regulations on automatic shutdown valves and remote control valves?
We are. In 2012, we provided a report to this committee. It helped us to inform our thinking on automatic shutoff valves, remote-controlled shutoff valves, and other safety technology, to the technical feasibility of it, the operational feasibility, as well as economic. So we are working on several rules right now. One of them looking at specifically leak detection in valves, the others looking at how we can improve integrity management, which does include the operator evaluating the usefulness and the safety benefit of valves. So we are working on that, and we hope to get those proposed rules issued as soon as
Thank you.
possible.
How is PHMSA doing with regard to controlling fugitive gas emissions and safety of pipelines that are serving fracking production?
Can I get back to you on the record on that question?
Suppose you can. In fact, yes, I'd
Thank
say
you.
you should.
Thank you.
Does PHMSA have the resources to complete rulemaking on a timely basis?
We are so grateful that in 2015, our budget provided us with the resources we need to hire 109 new people for the pipeline program. While 80% of those positions are going to be resources in the field to support inspections and enforcement, 20% of them are going to be at headquarters, and those positions are specifically going to help support our regulatory agenda, economic analysis, training, certification, and support of our state partners.
So now these are you said you hired 100 and some people. Are those mostly technical people, or are they management?
Mm-hmm. They are almost a great proportion of them are technical, yes. So in the field, the 80% of the 109, engineers, auditors, inspectors, and enforcement.
What about what are the requirements for PHMSA issuing a corrective action order?
The requirement for a corrective action order is imminent hazard, and that's part of our statutory authority. So the time when you will most likely see us issue a corrective action order is going to be after a pipeline failure, such as the one in Santa Barbara or the one in Illinois.
But you can and have issued those before failures?
We can if we have evidence of an imminent hazard. but more likely it's going to be issued after. And
So you don't have any historical examples of issuing one before an accident?
I don't have any examples for you right now. I will ask my technical team and get back to you on the record if we have an example of that.
Well, okay, in the remaining 40 seconds, please explain a little bit about the rulemaking process.
Sure. Before we're ready to issue a rule and we're putting together the information, we're generally going to do public workshops. We're going to do studies, and sometimes we're going to issue an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, which is more of a wide open request to stakeholders to provide us information to inform the rulemaking process. We're going to take all that information, we're going to put it together into a rule that has the safety requirements, safety benefits, and also the economic benefits. So what is the cost versus the safety benefit of the regulation? We issue that proposed regulation to the Federal Register. Again, we get stakeholder input. We put that stakeholder input together, and we have 2 advisory committees that we consult with when we are moving towards the final rule stage. We use them to advise us on the benefit of the rule, the safety requirements that we've put together, as well as the operational ability to implement, and then the economics, the cost of it. Once we issue a final
I'm going to have to yield back, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
I've run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
She was getting great detail. This
Sorry.
time I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Ms. Cummins. The spill in Illinois is located in my district. I talked with the city manager over actually yesterday morning. I think one of the interesting things was Keystone goes through that area also. And Keystone had provided them with a response trailer in which they were able to deploy with their firefighters to ensure the protection of the water supply, which is called Silver Lake. And so I would concur with what you concluded, that there is no threat to their drinking water. And their response was as per you would expect when you have pipelines. We do have a lot of pipelines. We have the Patoka terminal. So these things happen, and they're regretful, but the issue is responding. And I think that those of us who were here when we passed the last piece of legislation, we're hoping that we know we're not going to be perfect, but we want, obviously, to have a better process in place to be able to ensure that we can identify these before the accident occurs. Hence, all these lines of questions. The first issue that I would like you've answered some of them in your testimony, but could any of the Pipeline Safety Act mandates had made a difference, do you know, in the recent pipeline breaks, whether that's in California or the one recently in Illinois?
Because those 2 investigations are still going on, I don't think I can presuppose what the cause was, but we will absolutely be looking through our investigation at the condition of the pipe. We'll be looking at their inline inspection results. We'll be looking at what happened in the control room. How quick were they to respond? Did they follow their emergency response plans? And as well as the placement and how quick they closed valves and pumping stations. So I'd be happy to, once the investigation is complete, do an analysis of the results compared to the rulemakings and the mandates that we currently have.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. I think, I can't speak for California, but I know Plains put up a website to give the public access, whoever knew about it, to go to the website to get current update on their response, and I think that's been very helpful. I was going to ask about but you answered this already too, that there will be a correction action order probably conducted. Mm-hmm. Can you talk through some of the criteria that may be involved with that, and maybe some of the benchmarks, because now what we want to do is make sure there's some certainty, mm-hmm. obviously from the local community, that it's ready to go and up and running?
Absolutely. The corrective action order is being issued today by our regional director to Plains. And so I can tell you in general what's going to be in it. They were still working on it, the specifics as I was coming over to this hearing. But we're going to be looking at what was the cause. We're going to be looking at, because it was a pipe fitting, to look and see where else in the network those pipe fittings are, so that we can make sure that that this event won't happen somewhere else on the network, on the pipeline network. We're going to be looking at their emergency response notification. When did they notify? What was the timing? When did they know? And we will be looking for them to use third-party analysis similar to what we've required from Plains and Santa Barbara, and provide those results to us so that we can perform our investigation.
And lastly, we understand that you're having difficulty collecting data from states and localities about drinking water supplies and other ecological information. How can we help, or what can we do to help get the states to provide the information you need to do based upon previous past legislation and your intent on analysis?
Right. Yes, through our national pipeline mapping system, in trying to complete the mandates and also just create a good system that we can use, but also that's transparent. We have had some issues getting access to the right data, especially in a cost-effective manner. We would love help in figuring out the best way to get that data. We are looking at information collections right now, but I would love to take you up on your offer, and maybe through our reauthorization discussion or just individually, if we can come up with some ways to make that path cleaner, that would be great.
Well, and that's why we have these hearings too, to find out ways we can work together and be helpful. So I'm sure the committee's taken notes, and we can follow up with that. Thank you,
you
Mr.
so much.
Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time, recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Cummings, in the 2002 reauthorization, Congress added language to Section 60112 of the law to make it easier for the Secretary to take corrective action against a pipeline that poses a threat to life, property, or the environment. And because the Department doesn't issue licenses to pipeline operators, this authority is perhaps the closest tool the Secretary has to suspending or revoking a license. I note that PHMSA used this authority to address threats posed to Santa Barbara by 2 of the lines operated by Plains All-American, but I'm concerned that perhaps the hurdle for using this authority is still too high, and that the Secretary isn't able to take advantage of it as often as may be needed to protect the public and our environment. So my question is, do you need more flexibility or different, more usable tools to quickly address the threat of unsafe facilities?
The imminent hazard requirement is what we would use in order to issue a corrective action order in order to shut down a pipeline. We do have a lot of tools in our toolbox, but I think I would very much like to have the opportunity to talk in more detail about that specifically, and whether or not there was a way for us to use that emergency in advance of an accident. That's something we'd like to talk about in the future, but we are not afraid to use corrective actions when we need to, corrective action orders, and we have a lot of other tools in our toolbox that we continue to use for strong enforcement.
All right, and Congress will need to reauthorize the Pipeline Safety Act soon, and yet, as a number of us noted in our opening statements, PHMSA has yet to complete some of the most critical rulemakings mandated by the 2011 Act, including work surrounding leak detection, a very important matter in light of the recent incident in Santa Barbara. Not only does the Pipeline Safety Trust flag this inability to complete its rulemakings as a problem, but industry also views this as a matter that is hurting safety, as evidenced in Mr. Santa's testimony. My understanding is that these rulemakings have been held up in review at OMB due to open cost-benefit analysis questions. So if you could answer my question, what are these open benefit cost analysis questions referred to in the comment?
Well, we work with our interagency partners, OMB being one of those partners, to ensure that we're speaking with one voice on policy matters. We value the input of OMB. Whenever we go through the process of working a rule through OMB, it always ends up being a better product. Some of the things that they would ask us questions about through the rulemaking process are going to be, what are the assumptions that we used in order to generate the cost versus the benefit? They're going to be looking at the data that we use to justify the benefit that we have calculated. And we always get good information from OMB, and we reply as quickly as we possibly can, as do they. We work together to come up with the best possible rule. It's very important to us that when we do issue a rule, we get it right.
But how can these questions remain open for so long, and how have you tried to resolve them? And maybe most importantly, how can we help you? I mean, perhaps it's not your agency's fault these rules have yet to see the light of day, but you need to tell us what's going on and how we can help you get the job done.
I appreciate that offer for support from this committee. We believe that we have a very good relationship with OMB, and as I said, we believe we get a very valuable information back through the process. In my experience, we've been working very closely with OMB, and they have been very cooperative in helping us move our rules forward. But again, we want to make sure we get the rules right, and the methodical, open, and transparent process enables us to do that with stakeholder input.
Is there any way that we can help you, though? Because, you know, they've remained open for so long, and I know you say you're trying to resolve them, but how are we going to resolve it, and how can we help you?
I think having oversight hearings like this are a great way to do that. It brings visibility to PHMSA as an agency and also to the mandates of the Pipeline Safety Act. And I think that we have a great plan moving forward, and that you're going to see some proposed rules out of us, as you have in the last month. I think you're going to see them for the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you.
This time recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Director, the notices of proposed rulemaking announced in the last 2 weeks on accident notification and excess flow valves shows some incremental progress to address safety. However, there are many significant rules still pending. My question is, when can we expect these rules to be published, and will PHMSA commit to sharing a timeline or schedule for completion?
Yes, we have several rules that we are actively involved in the rulemaking process. We have a website that the Department of Transportation keeps up to date, and that website will provide the schedule of where the rule is and when we anticipate proposing it or issuing it. In addition, we at PHMSA have a website that we keep up to date on every mandate, all of the 42 mandates, as well as other activities in the Pipeline Safety Act. We keep that up to date as well. And so at any time, if you wanted information about our progress on the mandates or where we are in the rulemaking process, that is very transparent, and it's available on our website. But we'd be happy to come and provide you with a detailed brief of each of our rules, what we're looking at for the rules, and the schedule.
Thank you. Last year, Congress increased PHMSA's FY 2015 budget by 23%, and PHMSA has committed to hiring over 100 new personnel to conduct inspections and handle enforcement cases. What progress has PHMSA made to hire and train new personnel, and what can Congress do to help expedite the process?
Yes, we are so grateful that in the 2015 fiscal year, we have enough funding to hire 122 new positions, with 109 of them being in the pipeline program. I mentioned earlier that 80% of those are going to be in the field. Between on-board and people that have accepted positions, we are at 46% fill rate. We have a very robust strategy to bring the remainder of those positions on board. We're doing things like holding veterans fairs. We're doing recruitment. We've looked at our requirements to make sure that we are reaching the breadth of the folks out there who would be interested in coming to work for PHMSA. We've even requested direct hire authority, which we haven't received, but that would be very helpful in targeting those engineering skill sets that we're looking for at PHMSA. And as far as training, we have a very robust training program. We're going to train those new employees in a bit of a boot camp scenario so that they're being trained together and so that they become valuable parts of our inspection team as soon as possible.
Thank you. Section 4 of the Pipeline Safety Act required PHMSA to issue regulations, if appropriate, requiring the use of automatic or remote control shutoff valves on new or entirely replaced transmission pipelines. This regulation could improve the ability of pipeline operators to quickly stop the flow of crude oil or natural gas in the event of an accidental release. An operator delay in shutting down pipeline flow has been identified as the exacerbating factor in a number of recent pipeline failures, most prominently in the September 2010 natural gas pipeline in San Bruno, California, when it took an hour and a half to manually close the valve. In 2010 and 11, PHMSA issued notices of proposed rulemaking for both gas and liquid pipelines, and both announcements made clear that some change to the requirements for automatic or remote control valves was being considered. PHMSA has studied the issue, it's reported to Congress, so why, years later, hasn't PHMSA finalized their regulation?
We have issued studies, reports to Congress, and advance notice of proposed rulemaking. The rules that I spoke to you about, that we have a plan moving forward and we're working to propose, do address things like integrity management, increasing the breadth of our regulations, as well as automatic and remote controlled shutoff valves, leak detection, and other safety technologies that are available in the market that we will propose in those rules very soon.
Is PHMSA reviewing the need to propose changes to existing exemptions from federal regulation for gathering lines? And if so, when will this review conclude?
We are. We're looking at that as well as looking at how that might inform the rulemaking process. I can get back to you on exactly when we're going to be releasing that information, but we are working on it and we have a plan to release it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Interim Director Cummings, thank you for joining us. I have to state I don't envy your position today, having to appear before this committee and defend the agency and, frankly, its weak, as I would see it, record of achievement. That is not a reflection on you, but of the failure of the administration and Congress to support this agency and the vital safety mission that PHMSA serves. Mr. Weiner, in his testimony, said there is plenty of blame to be shared for the slowness in implementing pipeline safety initiatives. I agree. Placing blame doesn't solve any problems. Aggressive, faster action is what we need. That requires additional, sustained resources for your agency, our job here in Congress. And it requires PHMSA, DOT, and the administration truly to put safety first. We've been installing and conveying petroleum products, and natural gas through pipelines for more than 60 years. And I simply do not believe we have to continue to tolerate the number of accidents that occur as a basic cost of doing business. Section 8 of the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act directed the agency to study leak detection systems used by hazardous liquid pipeline operators and to issue regulations to require lead detection on these pipelines and or to set leak detection standards. The fact that Congress needed to put this into law in 2011 is disappointing. It seems to be a basic safety requirement that should have been in place some time ago. And I believe PHMSA completed that required study at the end of 2012, as you indicated. That is correct.
That is
right?
correct.
So when are we going to see a proposed rule, a final rule?
The status of the rulemakings that I spoke of earlier are proposed, notice of proposed rulemakings. We at PHMSA, the current team, the executive team, as well as the career staff, are focused and are completely committed to getting those rules, those proposed rules complete, getting them issued, and then quickly turning around, looking at stakeholder feedback and turning them into rules. We are absolutely committed to that, and we have a plan to do it.
Well, we're going to watch closely. Apparently, damage to pipelines by excavation continues to be one of the main causes of significant pipeline incidents. As I stated earlier, we have been building and using pipelines for a very long time. how detailed and accurate are the maps of the existing pipeline network?
I spoke earlier about the National Pipeline Mapping program that we have, and as you point out, the availability of data there is as good as the data that comes into it. It is complete from a federal perspective of our oversight, but there is more information that we would like to collect. Data is one area that I think we have room to improve, and I think we have room to work together to improve. Being able to have complete access and visibility and transparency across the country, and also to be able to evaluate through our data systems and analytics. Those are all very important and things that we are looking to do in the future, and it would be great to work with this committee to figure out ways to use data more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Most decisions about zoning and development are made at the local level. Is there a way to better engage our local officials? Do mayors and planning boards have access, appropriate access, great access to information that impacts their communities?
That's a great question. Part of our stakeholder outreach program at PHMSA looks at all sorts of things, ways that we can get information out, public workshops, local open houses, as well as the grant programs that we have specifically around things like excavation damage. We also look at ways that we can provide information to localities about planning and development as people start to move closer to pipelines that have been there for a very long time. And we do a lot of outreach related to that, as well as support to local planning. Our state partners are critical in our national pipeline safety program, and so any way that we can improve that collaboration, improve that relationship, we want to do that, and we're definitely open to ideas for how we could do that better.
And I thank you. It seems as though I'm almost out of time here. I would just encourage us to move along with the final plans that will be presented, the proposals that you've talked of, and to be able to go forward and address safety to the max. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks very much to our witness for being with us today. Appreciate your testimony today. And I was interested in your testimony where you cited that we have about 2.6 million miles of pipeline right now in the nation, and that also that the mileage is going up every year from the past where we're doing, it looks like you said, between 3,000 to 4,000 miles, and now about 3,500 to 7,500 miles per year. And I know that we've had the Secretary of Energy, and he talked about the energy boom, of course, that's occurring in this country on the natural gas and on the oil side, which makes it essential that we have the pipelines out there to move the energy that we have. And of course, like across Ohio and across my district, there are new pipelines being proposed. And I was wondering if you could, again, from your testimony, you state that you'd like to work, again, more with Congress to explain those risk reduction proposals. If you, again, could give more information to us on that, what those proposals might be on those reductions.
Sure. You did mention new construction and growth of the network. We do intend to spend about 25% of our inspection time supporting and looking at new construction pipelines. The best time to ensure that a pipeline is safe is during construction and before it actually goes into operation. And so the regulations that we have overseeing new construction, as well as our inspection and enforcement, are critical to long-term pipeline safety. From a risk perspective, some of the things that we're working on in terms of integrity management are to improve the actual integrity management process, but also to expand it into areas where integrity management isn't in place right now. Integrity management puts the onus on the operator to identify risk, and they use risk models in order to do that so that they can prioritize their investment in safety in their pipelines. One of the things we're doing in September is we're going to hold a workshop, and we're going to look at risk modeling across multiple industries, and we're going to see how we, PHMSA, can take that information and then share it back out with the industry so they can improve their risk models. because the best way to implement integrity management is to properly identify, properly assess risk. That way they can mitigate it. And our goal is to prevent a failure before it happens. And that's what risk management enables us to do in the pipeline safety program.
Well, thank you. And I know it's come up a little bit before in regards to the whole question about the call before you dig. And I know that, you know, around the areas you have the signs up that I know that companies have about call the 811 number. And also I see in your testimony that 28.3% of all distribution incidents were caused by the excavation damage, and that caused $25 million in damages, 1 fatality and 15 injuries. And you state that you know, you're working hard to raise that the 811 awareness. But could you give more detail about what you're doing to raise that with the local communities again? Because again, for a lot of us, we came from local governments at one point in our lives, and I was a county commissioner, and we had the planning commission that we all served on. But what are you doing to really get that information out? Because I know that you talked about the mapping and trying to find that information out. Not only what Mr. Shimkus had brought up about in regards to water, but others about existing pipelines. But what are we doing to try to get that for that 811 information for people to know that, you know, because a lot of times when people think about call before you dig, they're thinking, well, before I go out in my backyard and I'm going to dig a new hole for a tree, that I don't hit some kind of an electric line. But now we're talking about those transmission lines out there with excavation.
Yes, one of the greatest causes of, most frequent causes of pipeline failure is excavation damage. And we have our 811 program, which we oversee in conjunction with Common Ground Alliance, a non-for-profit group that works on 811. We do have a grant program associated with excavation damage as well as call before you dig. We have been doing a lot of outreach. You might have seen the Triple Crown winner was wearing an 811 hat this year. You'll see that we're having an 811 day at National Stadium. We are trying to use media as well as our local relationships with the local Common Ground Alliance folks to get the word out to use 811 and call before you dig. It's been proven through a study that if you use 811, it is over 99% effective. So what we need is for people to be making the call, because we know that if you make the call, that it's going to be effective.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cummings, I don't think it's a secret that I'm a big supporter of pipelines. I represent a district in North Houston and East Houston where I've never not lived on pipeline easements in my life. So I have a pretty good understanding about the utility of pipelines. It's the safest way to move a product. And I guess that's why I'm disappointed that that we haven't dealt with the requirements from the previous reauthorization to the now. And because since I live there and work there, you know, I think that we need quicker response in the 4 years since when we reauthorized pipeline safety last time. And due to the rapid expansion of oil and gas production in the U.S., we'll need to build thousands more miles of new pipelines, including gathering and transmission lines. Additionally, our power generation sector increasingly relies on natural gas, as we need more distribution lines as well. But we need to make sure these pipelines continue to be the safest mode for that transportation compared to rail and truck. We must also address the replacement of the pipelines. Our infrastructure continues to age. And PIMSA recently discussed a plan called Hazardous Liquids Integrity Verification Process. What has the reception been to that plan from the stakeholders?
The hazardous liquid proposed rule is one of the rules that I've been talking about. We did issue an advance notice of proposed regulation, proposed rulemaking. We did get stakeholder input, and we've used that to put back into the rulemaking process. We hope to be issuing a proposed rule on that within the year, and we're working hard on that. Stakeholder input was an important part of that process. If you like, I can put together a briefing that specifically identifies all the stakeholder input that we've gotten. But I think that and I know you have another panel that will have industry reps. I think that industry is as anxious as we are at PHMSA to have regulatory certainty, and I think that the plan that we have moving forward will enable that regulatory certainty, and so we appreciate your support in giving us the time to complete that plan and getting that information.
Well, we may take you up on that. If it's not with the committee, we have a natural gas caucus here that we may ask you to come over. When discussing pipeline replacement, is the cost recovery a major issue?
Yes, absolutely. We issued in 2011 a call to action, and a majority of the states have responded to that. But as you point out, replacement of old pipes has a cost to it, and a lot of our stakeholders are municipalities, and they have to do that through figuring out ways to recapture the cost. So that is an issue that those stakeholders are working.
What agencies are primarily responsible for setting these policies? I know it could be state and federal or both. Is that true on the policies for pipeline replacement?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Sorry.
I assume if they're interstate pipeline, you know, it's federal, but in some cases it's also a state authority. And I know in Texas, still a misnomer, our Railroad Commission is actually our pipeline agency. But how do you work with other states when they have a interest in it?
Right. Sorry about that. Of the 2.6 million miles, while we issue regulations and are responsible for pipeline safety across the country, we rely on our state partners to oversee and regulate 80% of those pipelines. And so we have a strong relationship with the states. We provide them training and certification. We also provide them grant funding. We evaluate them on a regular basis to make sure that they have the skills and tools that they need. And we also have a mentor program that we use to improve state performance when it comes to the oversight, the regulation of pipelines.
Mr. Chairman, I'm almost out of time, but I have questions I'd like to submit on PHMSA's leak detection integrity management rules and guidelines, and also the coordination for it. I'd be glad to submit those questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This time recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue is particularly important to us in West Virginia as we've trying to transport the Marcellus and the Utica gas throughout the state and finish the network of piping. But it seems a few months don't go by without another leak, another explosion, another fire. We just had one last week again. It just seems to be one after another, and I don't know how we're going to stem the loss of confidence of the American public that we're doing all that we should be doing to do this, because it's almost like it's as though someone's willing to let these things happen because then people turn on fossil fuels, whether it's oil or gas. So I'm hoping that's not part of a plan here that to slow the implementation. How would you grade the fact, I was a little startled when 17 of the 42 standards have not been met. How would you grade the performance of the agency? Would you give yourself an A for what you've done?
Out of the 42 mandates, we've completed 26.
How would you grade yourself? How would you grade? Are you doing an A grade, a B? How would you grade yourself?
I've been very, very impressed with the staff that I've met at PHMSA, and when it comes to commitment to safety and a desire to get these rules done, I would definitely grade us.
You've evaded twice already the question that was asked to you on both sides of the aisle. What's the schedule? And you avoided it very effectively, I might add. But now I'm going to ask that same question, but right now, first, how do you grade your performance? Do you think it's a passing grade? Is it a C, a B? How would you grade? Did you do what you were asked to do?
We are.
Yes or no? A or B?
We have not completed all of the mandates that you have asked us to complete, but we are absolutely making progress on every single one of them.
I hear that. So you're going to play that game with me too, I guess. So the other two questions were, when's the schedule? Are you going to finish at the end of this year? Is it going to be spring of next year? When? Don't tell me to go find it myself on a website. When? I'm asking you, when will you be finished?
I can tell you that we have a plan, and I can tell you that we're working with our stakeholders to go through the methodical rulemaking process, and that every single person at PHMSA is absolutely committed to getting that plan done.
I'm sure you said that back in 2 years, that you or your agency said our last 3 years. But this has been since 2011. And I'm sure the low-hanging fruit was already picked to make that happen, but we've got 17 more that probably are contentious. When will they be finished? When will they be approved? You blamed OMB. I wish OMB were here to whether or not they would accept that responsibility, but you threw them under the bus. So I'm just trying, what do we have to do I want to restore the trust of the American public that enough's enough. And I'm not getting confidence at all from you. It's very evasive on this. So how would you do it? If you're not going to answer the question, you're going to tell me, go find it yourself. Is that correct? Go find it myself?
What I wanted to express when I was telling you about the website was that we are being as transparent as possible by posting that information on the website. The status of every single individual rule, where it's been and where it's going and how long it's been there is absolutely available. It's a very transparent process. We have a plan moving forward. As I said, we have 2 rules that I think are close to being complete within the year. I mean, within this calendar year. And we have some other rules that we're working very hard on at PHMSA to get complete and to have our economic analysis complete so that we can move to issuing those proposed rules.
So are you suggesting that by the end of next year, you may have all 42 mandates complete?
I know that the rulemaking process that we are currently going through is going to address 11 of the mandates, and that we have reports that are currently being finalized that are going to address 4 of the mandates. And so, yes, we are making progress on absolutely every single one of them. I simply can't look into the future and see what stakeholder input we may get, what new technology might be developed, or what new requirements might come up to change our priorities to say exactly when all 42 will be done. But I can tell you that every single person at PHMSA is committed and dedicated to getting them done.
I hope your priorities are reestablishing the confidence of the American public that we're doing everything we can to give them pipeline safety.
And that's what we want as well. Thank you, Congressman.
This time, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Cummings, for your testimony. My questions today, because there are still so many unanswered ones about the causes of and responses to the May 19th Plains oil spill in my district, will have to do with that particular incident. I know the investigation, not the rulemaking necessarily, but the investigation takes time. It's important to get the facts right. But it has been 2 months since the spill occurred on the pristine coastline, Gaviota Coast, my district. When will this investigation be completed and the results shared with the public?
Thank you, Congresswoman Capps. And before I answer, I'd just like to thank you for your support of the agency, as well as the time you've spent with our PHMSA employees and talking to them out in San Diego. They appreciated it. And I hope you found, as I have, how dedicated to safety those PHMSA staff are, and that they take this oil spill personally, just like you do. The investigation will take time. There are many aspects that will require third-party evaluation, as well as research into different parts of the organization about what happened. Some of the things that we are specifically focused on is that third-party evaluation of the condition of the pipe. I think the last I heard, that is going to take a couple of months to get the report from the third-party evaluator.
Okay.
The third-party evaluation of the inline inspection, that is going to take a couple of months.
All right.
A corrective action order can actually be in place for several months, and
Okay.
it's not until, go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to ask some other questions as well, and so I now have a time frame. And thank you. Please keep this, my office and my constituents, that's a good way to do it, and this committee updated as to how things progress. I must say the information we have so far is very troubling. Makes us question the condition of, now I understand it's millions of miles of pipeline running through our country. As you know, Plains did an inline inspection of Line 901 May 5th, and this is just 2 weeks before that very line ruptured. This inspection showed 45% metal loss at the rupture site. Yet now we are shocked to discover that the actual level of corrosion was over 80% when the ruptured pipe was evacuated. I've seen it myself. Ms. Cummings, were you surprised by the disparity, and is this a common occurrence?
The inline inspection tool provides a great deal of data, and that data has to be analyzed by experts in order to determine what the data is telling them. They also go out and actually do digs and look at those anomalies to compare them to the data to make sure that they're getting the right information. I think that the results of an inline inspection need to be looked at from an expert on the data and an expert on pipelines.
Now I'm cutting off again, but you're
Sorry,
making it sound so obtuse. It's a disparity.
It is a disparity.
And it's disturbing. And it's not the only time it happens. Plains has reported that the inline inspection also overestimated the amount of corrosion at other points along the pipeline. We'd rather have an overestimate of a corrosion than underestimate. But these inline inspections are clearly not very accurate. Whether the issues with the technology, system operators, or both, there's clearly a problem here. So what is PHMSA doing to improve the accuracy? I mean, either over or under. What can we do to improve the accuracy of inline inspections in general?
To your point of the investigation, that will be part of our investigation, but looking at inline inspection and other assessment tools across the board, our research and development budget and our program is a partnership with industry where we identify those areas where we can use our funds to invest in future safety technologies. And one of the technologies we invest in a lot is inline inspection and other assessments. And so your support of our research and development program is actually the best way for us to be able to improve that assessment data and get closer to reality and to be able to mitigate risk.
Thank you. In addition, and I hope I can get my third question out here, in addition to corrosion on Line 901, dozens of corrosion problems have been found on an adjacent Line 903, a longer and wider segment of pipe connected to the ruptured Line 901. These numerous problems have been outlined in your corrective action order, and I have your submission of those to us here and want to submit them for the record here. Plains has even acknowledged the problem by accelerating the frequency of its inline inspections after its 2012 inspection found 41 anomalies serious enough to require excavation. Yet, despite the pattern of corrosion and the failure to accurately measure the level of corrosion on the rupture site, PHMSA is still allowing Plains to operate 903 line at reduced pressure. Why is PHMSA allowing Line 903 to operate when it has the very same corrosion disparities and problems as the pipeline that ruptured? What assurances can you provide that Line 903 won't have the same problems that Line 901?
As you pointed out in our corrective action order, we did notice similarities between 901 and 903, and so we took that imminent hazard and we applied it to Line 903, and we have put additional requirements on Plains. The Line 01 is empty. Line 903 does have oil in it. They are not operating it in regular course of action. About 100 miles away from the coast, just a portion of 903 is intermittently being operated, but the rest of 903 remains shut down. And they will only be able to operate under our authority if we allow them under the corrective action order.
Gentlelady's time's expired. This time I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Mr. McKinley touched on it. Others have touched on it. Ms. Capps in her questions, although she didn't say it directly. One of the big concerns here is that we passed a law 4 years ago in an attempt to make the pipeline safer. We're still trying to get those regulations implemented. They're not ready yet. and there is a confidence or a lack of confidence from the public. Now, I'm going to take just a second and go to a different subject. I promise you it's relevant. The EPA's Clean Power Plan, the final rules are not out yet. Some 13 to 16 months after that rule comes out, the states have to come up with their plan, and by 2020, they have to start implementing that plan. As a result, in part of that pressure being placed on electric generation companies, two major pipelines, I told you I'd bring it around, two major pipelines have been proposed coming through my region of the state. I represent a big chunk of one of them, and the other one affects constituents of mine even if it doesn't actually come through my district. Their concern in many ways is about safety. And I've been communicating this morning with one of those constituents. Her farm is going to be affected by the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And there are real concerns there. And part of the concern and the lack of confidence is the states and individuals are having to deal with the consequences of these EPA regulations faster than you can get the regulations for safety that we passed 4 years ago implemented. What do I say to them when they say to me, you know, in rural areas, the shutoffs are only 20 miles apart. They're 20 miles apart. That's a long way on a rural road if you have to get from point A to point B, if that's not following a road. What do I say to them about the safety components when you all can't even get the regs out that we thought were necessary that you get out 4 years ago because of previous safety problems? How do I make my constituents feel like if somebody's putting a 42-inch natural gas pipeline through their property or near their property, or they're near one of the compressing and pumping stations, how can they feel safe? What can you say to them? Because I will tell you that this one constituent in particular is watching. So look at the camera and tell her, how can she feel safe if her farm is now going to be dissected or cut through by a pipeline?
Well, PHMSA is first and foremost a safety agency, and the safety of those pipelines are what we think about 100% of the time. And while we are working on those 42 mandates and working on getting those regulations out, we have a lot of experience with new construction because we spend about 25% of our inspection time with new construction, looking at how they are implementing our regulations, how they're testing to make sure they're safe. And what we've done is we've actually learned a lot about new construction that we have put out through safety advisory bulletins, that we've put out to the industry in different ways that helps to ensure that we learn a lesson.
And I know you're trying, but it doesn't instill confidence when we hear about other pipeline problems in other parts of the country, when we hear that pipelines that may have problems are still being used, and now they're saying they want to bring a pipeline through our area. It causes great concern on the safety factor. What about the shutoffs in rural areas? Should they be closer together? Is that something that we should be working on in Congress?
So I think we talked earlier about a 2012 report that talked about automatic shutoff valves, and it talked about them being technically, operationally, and economically feasible, but not in all cases. And so we will be putting out proposed rules that will capture the right stakeholder information to make sure that we put out regulations that are going to meet the safety requirements without creating unintended consequences.
Well, and I appreciate that. Another question I get on a regular basis as a result of being right in the eye of the storm for major pipelines coming through the area is, why are we cutting through new paths? Is there some safety reason why you don't want to co-locate natural gas pipelines together? Because we're cutting through a bunch of new paths, not following the lines that are already there.
Mm-hmm. We as a safety agency, we don't have a primary lead role in the permitting and
I understand that. My question is there a safety concern with co-location?
I understand. Can I get back to you on the record? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
All right, I would greatly appreciate it because I probably have, I know I've got at least one watching, but I have a lot of constituents who want to know the answer to that question. Okay. With that, I see my time is up, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you having this important hearing, and I yield back.
This time recognize Mr. Loebsack for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Ms. Cummings. I'm from Iowa, and I think a lot of us on both sides of the aisle have a lot of concerns being from these rural areas, and I echo many of those concerns that have been already mentioned today. I think I mentioned to you before your testimony that we have a proposed Bakken pipeline that would extend from northwest Iowa down through my district, much of my district, all the way down to southeast Iowa. And it would bring that crude from North Dakota, transport it eventually to points to the east and south. And, you know, I just have a question sort of from your perspective. You know, you mentioned that you're involved in safety and all the rest. Eventually, this is going to be approved or not by the Iowa Utilities Board. There's not a federal role as far as approval of this pipeline is concerned. But can you talk to me a little bit about sort of the safety concerns that you folks basically have supervision over when it comes to something like this?
Sure, thank you. The most important thing that we can do is to build safety and build quality into the pipeline before it actually goes into operation. And so the requirements in our regulations for new construction, a lot of them are prescriptive. So they're looking at things like the material in the weld and making sure that they're properly installed by qualified people to install them. We also require a hydro test to make sure that before the pipeline goes into operation, that it's safe and that there are no leaks. We would encourage in new construction pipeline to do inline assessments and to really understand the attributes of the pipeline so that when integrity management principles are applied to that pipeline, that there's a baseline that they can use going forward to look at trends and to be able to identify that risk. And our goal is to prevent pipeline failures, and integrity management and risk management and inline assessments and other assessments are the way that we do that.
So as the regulations currently exist, encourage is the best word that you can use at this point?
On the hydro test and on the other requirements, those are prescriptive, those are requirements. We've shared information. There's information available in partnership with industry on best practices. And when we identify issues that we see are common across different new construction, whether they're directly applicable to our prescriptive regulations or whether they're best practices, we have ways that we can share them with our stakeholders to make sure everyone's aware through safety advisories or through workshops.
Because I think that's one of the big concerns that I'm hearing expressed throughout my district is the whole safety issue, leakage, all those things. And if in fact the Iowa Utilities Board does approve this pipeline, I'm going to want to make sure that my constituents get the best information possible. Opponents to this are never going to be convinced this thing is going to be entirely safe. But using the word encourage doesn't give me a lot of confidence when I go home and then say to them, well, you know, the regulators are telling me they're going to encourage folks to do this or that. So I would hope that there would be something much stronger than that in the regulations. And I do want to, of course, agree with folks here today who've expressed concerns that, you know, we haven't seen the final rule making actually done yet for a number of these things. And just want to encourage you, obviously, to use that word, because that's all I can do to make sure that we finish this up. I have one other question having to do, I don't think it's been brought up yet today. I served on the Armed Services Committee for 8 years, traveled overseas quite a lot. I'm not on the Homeland Security Committee, but, you know, I have a map, an alleged map at least, of pipelines that are in Iowa. And I didn't get that map because I'm a member of Congress and because I have some kind of security clearance to have access to that map. And I have a lot of concerns about access to information that's open to the public, especially when it comes to potential terrorist threats. Talk to me about that. Talk to us about that, how this information that could be used by a potential domestic or international terrorist to disrupt a pipeline, gas or oil or whatever the case may be, how's that information? How are we sure that information is not available to folks out there who want to do harm to our country?
The National Pipeline Mapping System does have role-based access, meaning that the information that's available to the public is information that we have deemed is not security sensitive. We take that threat very seriously as well, and this committee and our statutory authority has given us the ability to redact information that we make public to make sure that security sensitive information is not included in public release. The information that is available to local lawmakers, to local emergency responders, they apply for that access, and they're only given that access when we verify their identity and their need to have that type of information.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Cummings, thanks for joining us today. In your response to Representative Olson a little bit ago, you said that PHMSA is looking at how to improve, expand, and enhance risk-based management. Would you explain a little bit more in detail what you mean by that? How are you going to go about doing that?
Sure. We have several ongoing rulemakings that have been the topic of discussion this morning. And integrity management, which is our risk-based approach to pipeline safety in high-consequence areas, relies on that risk-based approach. And those rules are going to be proposed to expand where we are using those risk-based methodologies, meaning on the percentage of pipeline that we're looking at to apply those integrity management principles where it makes sense, and also to improve integrity management. I mentioned that in September, we're going to be holding a workshop, and we're going to be bringing in folks from across different industries, such as aviation, the energy industry, other nuclear, for example, who use risk-based approaches and look at how they model risk, because in order to mitigate the proper risk, in order to avoid a pipeline failure, you need to be identifying the right risk, assessing that risk, and then mitigating it properly for your pipeline. And so those are some of the examples of ways that we're going to be improving integrity management, both internal to PHMSA and our oversight, but also integrity management in the industry.
Are you including cost in that analysis and in the improvement effort? And are you having difficulty in incorporating cost into a risk-based regulation?
Our statutory authority for PHMSA requires that our regulations have benefits that exceed costs. So that is part of our statutory requirement. So yes, we are looking at the cost to implement these improvements versus the safety benefit. So in order to do that, we have a team of economists, and they look at past performance, so the likelihood, risk goes back to likelihood and consequence, the likelihood and the cost of that consequence, and then the safety requirements we put in place, how much it costs to implement them, and we do a comparison of the benefit versus the cost.
Okay. All right. Section 21, Ms. Cummings directed PHMSA to review and report to Congress on existing federal and state regulations for all gathering lines. With the report, which was submitted more than 1 year late, PHMSA stated that it is considering the need to propose additional regulations to ensure the safety of natural gas and hazardous liquid gathering lines. So is PHMSA reviewing the need to propose changes to existing exemptions from federal regulations for gathering lines? And if so, when will this review conclude?
Yes, the report that you're referring to, we delivered to Congress earlier this year. And what we found is that some gathering lines are actually have the same attributes as transmission lines as far as size and amount carried. And so as a result of that report, we are looking at our regulations, and we expect to propose in our future rulemaking proposals in the near future to look at how we can capture more information about gathering lines, as well as what parts of our regulations should be applied to gathering lines based on what we learned in that report.
Okay, all right. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Can you give us a sense of how much pipeline infrastructure overall is within the jurisdiction of your agency? Kind of describe that.
Sure. There are 2.6 million miles of pipeline in the nation. While we, as a federal regulator, we issue regulations across the entire nation for those pipelines. From an oversight and enforcement perspective, we partner with the states. So the states actually oversee 80% of those 2.6 million pipelines. We enforce and oversee 20%. But the states are very close partners of ours. We provide them with training, certification, as well as grant funding. And we provide them mentorship as well.
So do you consider, I mean, your direct oversight is with respect to 20%, but presumably you consider yourself as having oversight responsibility with respect to the 100% acting in partnership?
Correct, in partnership with our states.
Yeah. And can you give me a sense of the actual amount of FTE or sort of what the capacity of your compliance and enforcement staff is within your agency specifically?
Sure. We're very grateful that this year our 2015 budget enabled us, gave us the funding we needed to hire 109 new people into the pipeline part of our organization. Our field staff, prior to that influx of new people, was about 135 people. We're bringing in that 109 new people, so we are almost doubling our enforcement staff with the positions that were appropriated, the funds that were appropriated this year for new positions. So we have, in the past, I would say, if you're looking at legacy, 135 or so positions.
In any event, I would imagine that you have some reasonable expectation that the industry, the pipeline industry itself, will come with kind of a good faith commitment to meeting the standards that apply to it. Nevertheless, we've seen companies like the Plains All-American Pipeline and others that don't have a great track record when it comes to putting these kinds of things in place and adhering to them. And I was wondering what your thoughts might be on ways to create more accountability within the industry itself, within these companies, so that the sort of compliance and accountability arm within those organizations has a heightened sense of responsibility. That could include things like certifying that they're meeting certain standards as a corporation, for example, and understanding that there might be consequences for not stepping up to that statement of accountability. Have you thought about things like that that could improve what I would say in the best sense could be cooperation between the agency's oversight and the industry's own responsibility to come in and step up to its accountability?
Absolutely. An operator is 100% responsible for the safety of the pipelines that they operate, and they do so under our enforcement and under our guidance and regulations. One thing that we at PHMSA were happy to see is in the last week, API released a safety management system best practices document that really was the industry coming together and looking at a tool, safety management systems, that has been successful in other industries. And it would take sort of the things we've been talking about today about integrity management being risk-driven and really take that to another level. So I think that industry, I believe that the industry is responsible for safety. I think that they know they're responsible for safety. This is a great step that they took in partnership with us. We were on the teams putting this together. The combination of both prescriptive and performance-based regulations from PHMSA are another way that industry can through our performance-based specifications, apply technology that's going to make the pipeline system, the pipeline network safer. And so, yeah, there's a lot we can do together to improve pipeline safety.
Well, I appreciate that, and it'll be interesting to monitor how the industry fulfills those new expectations. But I think that there could be a place in the future, if we don't see that kind of accountability that needs to be there, for people within these organizations kind of having to sign on a dotted line and certify that these things are in place and put their name as leaders of those organizations behind those commitments. Thank you, and I yield back.
This time, recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Cummings, for joining us today. A lot of great questions have been answered, and so I just have a couple of things I'd like to drill into that follow up a little bit on Mr. Sarbanes' question, but more closely to Mr. Pitt's questions. I think in response to one of Mr. Pitt's questions, you said that the progress you've made to hiring that 109 new people is 46%. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to verify that. And in your response, you also said something about requesting direct hire approval. Can you tell the committee what does that give you? What does that mean, and how do you get that approval?
Direct hire authority is a tool in the federal government that allows us to streamline the hiring process. It's something that we had requested of the Office of Personnel Management. We heard back that it was not approved. We think that that's one tool that we were looking at, but we're looking at a lot of other tools to recruit for qualified and well-educated people who want to dedicate their life to public service and dedicate their life to safety. So we are actively recruiting for positions across the country as well as here in DC. And I think I mentioned also that tomorrow we're going to be having a veterans hiring fair at the Department of Transportation. So we're really focused on getting great people into the department, again, who are dedicated to public service.
If you had direct hire authority at the beginning of the fiscal year when you got the additional funding, where do you think you would be on hiring today?
I think we would be much further along. I don't want to commit and say that we would be at 100% right now. But we need to make sure that we're hiring the right people, and so a lot of the process is going through the reviewing resumes and making sure that we're doing good interviews and that we're getting the right people with the right skills. But I do think we would make more progress. Thank you.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Cummins, for being here. You know, a lot of talk has been obviously on the pipelines, and yet the pipelines still provide the best option to provide the resources we're needing to ship across this country from Part A to Part B. In fact, 99.9% of all of it in the pipelines, be it natural gas or oil, it gets to its destination with 0 incidents. Without question, it is a vital part of the infrastructure and a competitive advantage we have in this country for our energy rates being at the low level that they are. And what we're talking about right now is going back to 2011 when there's 17 mandates that haven't been implemented. And we've talked a lot about that. But I don't know if we've really spent the time about the industry itself. See, as a business owner, the biggest problem we have is understanding where the regulatory environment is going. And it's certainty that we're needing. It's understanding of what are we going to have to comply with. When we're bidding a job, we've got to understand what our cost is going to be. And since we've been waiting for 4 years for PHMSA to implement these, it's creating a tremendous amount of uncertainty of knowing where the industry can go. We know we're going to have to start building some pipelines in a serious way. I mean, as this administration's war on coal continues, we're going to have to get a lot more pipelines in the ground to provide the resources we're going to have. And ma'am, the position that you're in is kind of in question. I mean, you're filling in a position, and I commend you for that.
Thank you.
But are you capable right now to steer the PHMSA?
PHMSA, correct.
PHMSA in the right direction? Are you able to make those decisions, or are you guys going to be sitting there waiting for the next administrator to be assigned to you?
The president nominated Marie-Therese Dominguez, and
Right.
we are anxiously awaiting her confirmation. She is serving right now as the deputy administrator at PHMSA. The career staff, the entire operation at PHMSA is fully dedicated to achieving these mandates, and regardless of the fact that we're in a transition, does not stop those career employees, that workforce, from every day dedicating their time to safety and to completing these mandates.
Then why haven't they been completed? I mean, when the president puts out an order, it's done. I mean, we seem to implement very complicated, in fact, some regulations that's not even obtainable, and we're already enforcing them. And we're talking about setting 17 mandates back from 2011. And look, I'm not pushing for them to be there. I'm just saying that either tell the industry you're moving 40 or not, or say that, hey, we're going to take the best practices that you guys have already put in place, which this might be an idea. What you guys have done, you've improved safety in a tremendous amount so far on your own. The industry has on their own. Maybe we take their best business practice and say, we're going to take this and apply this, and we're going to see how it moves forward, rather than keeping the industry in limbo. And I understand, ma'am, you're doing the best you can, but we are talking about an industry that is a vital resource that we have inside the United States that provides the infrastructure and the resources that all of us use. I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on fossil fuels or not. You use them. So we're trying to make sure that we don't run short of that supply, and I'm just wanting to make sure that we create the certainty for the industry that's needed to be there. And Ms. Cummings, I really do applaud you, because I think you're doing an outstanding job in the position that you're in. But I want to make sure that the industry isn't held hostage at this time too. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Chairman, for holding this important meeting.
Well, thank you, and that concludes the questions except for mine, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. But Ms. Cummings, also I want to thank you for being with us and addressing the concerns of the committee.
Thank you.
And I think it's quite obvious to everyone that one of the major concerns is that this act was adopted in 2011, reauthorized, and we've got 16 mandates that really have not been addressed. And Mr. Mullen, I think, made an important point in his remarks, and that is that these pipeline companies, as they are involved in maintenance, constructing new pipelines, making improvements, the uncertainty of what's going to happen in these areas does present some problems for them. And I don't think any of us can say with certainty that the fact that these 16 mandates have not been put in a regulation had anything to do with these spills. We don't know that. But, you know, one conclusion we can come up with, and we know for a fact that you all cannot do any of your regulations. You can't make them final without a sign-off of OMB. They have to be involved in that process. And every agency in Congress, we all have our priorities. And I think everyone recognizes that the priority for this administration is the Clean Energy Plan. And that's a priority for OMB. And EPA has been super aggressive in that area. And one conclusion that we can come up with is that IMSA and the regulations coming out of your agency is not the same priority as the Clean Energy Plan in this administration. Now, I'm not going to ask you to address it, but that's a conclusion, a logical conclusion that we can come up with. So I want to thank you once again. We look forward to working with you as we move forward, and so you can be relieved at this time, and thank you for being with us. And I'd like to call up the second panel of witnesses at this time. And if the second panel would just have their seat, and then I'm just going to introduce you when you give your opening 5-minute statement, and then we'll go from there. Okay, our first witness today is Mr. Stan Wise, who is the commissioner with the Georgia Public Service Commission, and he's going to be testifying on behalf of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Mr. Wise, thanks very much for being with us, and you'll be recognized for 5 minutes, and we just ask you to turn the microphone on and just kind of watch when the red light goes on, then your time has expired. But thanks for being with us, and you're recognized.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you so much for this opportunity to testify on this very important issue. I am testifying on behalf of my state and on NARUC. And first, let me just say that Georgia's pipeline safety program is one of the larger state programs based on service, miles, mains, inspectors, and budget. And our program has been ahead of the curve on cast iron replacement and bare steel. We've got less than 5 miles remaining. We've done it over a 20 years period. And let me say, in no small part, it's important that we recognize the relationship that our inspectors and our state has had with PHMSA and the ability to go ahead and be able to do the job we can because of that important financial partnership as well as a sharing of information as we go along. But one issue that continues to cause problems for us is the increasing delays in receiving base grant reimbursements. And like other states over the past few years, the amount of time that Georgia's had to wait to get paid for enforcing these important pipeline safety rules has increased steadily. And in years past, our finance department could depend on timely payments, which is very important in tight state budget. This clearly is an issue that needs resolved. 19 states have adopted new civil penalty standards. Some states believe that it's more important to penalize earnings or rates of return rather than to simply levy fines. We also believe that the state damage prevention issue prevents some states from participating in the program and ineligible for state one-call and preventive grants because of state law. And these exemptions directly affect safety in those states, and it's counterproductive to the goal of preventing damage. We do agree that PHMSA needs to publish the required study on automatic and remote control shutoff valves. States need to know what this rate structure is, even if it raises rates in our state for the stability that would be required for the installation and maintenance of these facilities. PHMSA has not published the evaluation of the current integrity management regulations and whether or not these requirements should be expanded beyond the high consequence area. NARUC and its members are very interested in the findings of this study. High consequence areas, and PHMSA has not updated the national pipeline mapping system to include the identification of high consequence areas. On leak detection, PHMSA has produced a report but not yet published the notice of proposed rulemaking. The language in the 2011 Act has caused financial difficulties in the states, which I referenced specifically to Georgia, and they must issue waivers for the 36 more states each year. Gathering lines is certainly important in this new paradigm of oil recovery in our country, and we suggest that the gathering lines should be regulated in order to risk to the public. Notice of proposed rulemaking released on excess flow valves was released early this month. NARUC is currently reviewing that proposal. We also believe that PHMSA has not yet implemented regulations on maximum allowable operating pressure. We need to see these rules in a prudent and expeditious manner to ensure the public safety of these lines. Mr. Chairman, we specifically speak to safety and efficiency issues. It could be economic. These are important issues to our states. The implementation and the reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act is important to NARUC and to our states, and we thank you for this time to be able to express our views.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wise. And our next witness is Donald Santa, who is the President and CEO of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America. Mr. Santa, thanks for being with us, and you're recognized 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitfield and members of the subcommittee. My name is Donald Santa, and I'm President and CEO of the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, or INGA. INGA represents interstate natural gas transmission pipeline operators in the U.S. and Canada. The pipeline systems operated by INGA's 25 member companies are analogous to the interstate highway system, transporting natural gas across state and regional boundaries. In the wake of the natural gas pipeline accident in San Bruno, California in 2010, INGA's board of directors committed the association and its member companies to the goal of zero pipeline safety incidents. While this is a tough and some would say impossible goal to meet, the emphasis is in the right place, a pursuit of excellence. While progress towards INGA's goal of zero incidents must continue, whether or not new regulations are issued, it is important and desirable that there be consistency between the voluntary commitments in the INGA Action Plan and the regulations that will implement the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act. INGA has engaged in active dialogue with PHMSA and other stakeholders over the past 3 years to achieve this goal. This has been constructive, and we have every reason to believe that the comprehensive rule proposed soon will reflect INGA's input. Still, these proposed regulations are behind the schedule that Congress prescribed in 2011. INGA acknowledges that regulations should be thoughtfully considered and include an analysis of costs and benefits. The practical consequences of this delay, however, is to erode the confidence of some pipeline companies that proceeding with the dedication of resources needed to implement the pipeline safety commitments will be consistent with the final rules adopted by PHMSA. This hesitancy is rooted in the perceived risk that the rules ultimately might compel repeating certain steps in the Pipeline Safety Action Plan. This is not insignificant. For example, testing pipelines for material strength is both costly and disruptive because pipelines need to be removed from operation to complete this testing. This do-over risk creates financial risk for pipeline operators and their customers, as well as the risk of more extensive operational disruptions that would be needed. This do-over risk should not be permitted to hold us back when we, as an industry and our regulators, should be moving forward. Our purpose here is to work collaboratively with PHMSA. Because the regulatory process indeed goes beyond what PHMSA can control, INGA wishes to make the point that it is critical that these natural gas pipeline safety regulations be completed in a workable and timely manner. It is worth recalling that the title of the most recent law reauthorizing the Pipeline Safety Act makes the point. It is the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011. Regulatory certainty is necessary to move forward. INGA supports the reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Program during this Congress. My written statement includes some suggestions for the legislation, including providing some more definition for several key natural gas regulations. With further definition from Congress, we believe the proposed rules could be completed in a more timely manner, and the pipeline industry would have greater certainty about what the future regulations would require. This would allow operators to start working towards those requirements now, as opposed to just waiting until a set of regulations is final at an unknown date. We continue to believe that a reauthorization bill and the accountability and oversight that comes with it will help to get PHMSA back on track for meeting the safety mandates required in 2011. I'd be happy to discuss this and further suggestions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the subcommittee.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Santa. And our next witness is Mr. Ron Bradley, who is Vice President of Gas Operations for PECO Energy, and I think you're testifying on behalf of the American Gas Association.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitfield and members of the committee. My name is Ron Bradley, and I serve as the Vice President of Gas Operations at PECO, which provides reliable electric and natural gas service to more than 1.6 million electric customers and more than 500,000 gas customers in southeastern Pennsylvania. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of the natural gas distribution industry. PECO is a part of the Exelon family of companies. Exelon is the nation's largest competitive energy provider. In addition to Exelon's generation, power, and unregulated businesses, our sister utilities include BGE in Baltimore and ComEd in Chicago. Combined, we serve 6.6 million electric customers in Illinois, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and more than 1.1 million natural gas customers in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Today, I'm testifying on behalf of the American Gas Association, which represents more than 200 local distribution companies, also known as LDCs, which serve more than 71 million customers. AGA's member companies operate 2.4 million miles of underground pipelines, safely delivering clean, affordable natural gas to residential, commercial, and industrial customers. LDCs provide the last critical link in the energy delivery chain, connecting interstate pipelines directly to homes and businesses. Our focus today is ensuring that we keep the gas flowing safely and reliably. As part of an agreement with the federal government, most states assume primary responsibility for safety regulation of LDCs, as well as intrastate transmission pipelines. Some governments are encouraged to adopt minimum standards promulgated by the U.S. Department of Transportation. Many states choose to adopt standards that are more stringent than federal requirements. Additionally, our companies are in close contact with state pipeline safety inspectors, working in a collaborative manner that provides for far more inspections than required under federal law. LDCs do not operate strictly in a compliance culture, but rather in a culture of proactive, collaborative engagement. Each company employs trained safety professionals, provides ongoing employee evaluations and safety training, conducts rigorous system inspection, testing, maintenance, repair, and replacement programs, and educates the public on natural gas safety. AGA's commitment to enhancing safety, adopted in 2011, provides a summary statement of these commitments. The association has also developed numerous pipeline safety initiatives focused on raising the bar on safety, including peer-to-peer reviews and best practice forums that share best practices and lessons learned throughout the industry. Each year, LDCs spend approximately $19 billion on safety, half of that on our voluntary activities. This number continues to escalate as work commences on newly approved accelerated pipeline replacement programs. The Pipeline Inspection, Protection, Enforcement, and Safety Act of 2006 and the Pipeline Safety, Regulatory Certainty, and Job Creation Act of 2011 both outline several programs that help continue to improve the safety of the industry. AGA member companies have implemented aspects of these programs either through DOT regulation or voluntarily. However, many of these programs are in their infancy in terms of implementation, and we encourage Congress to allow these programs to develop and mature. In the case of unanimously passed 2011 Act, we dealt with a number of key issues. Several of the required regulations have yet to be finalized. Progress is being made, however, and thus we believe it would be premature to make changes to the law at this time. For instance, the industry is experiencing significant uncertainty regarding PHMSA implementation of maximum allowable operating pressure and the integrity verification programs. We are prepared to act, but regulatory certainty provided by implementation of regulation would be beneficial to the industry and customers alike. Layering new laws and regulations onto companies before existing regulations have been finalized and given a reasonable amount of time to work is likely to create uncertainty that undermines our shared safety goals. PHMSA has issued a number of significant guidance documents, released the results of congressionally mandated study on leak detection, and created a database to track progress in replacing cast iron. With regard to replacement of cast iron, the quantity of these mains continues to steadily decline, making up less than 3% of total mileage. There are 29,358 miles of cast iron still in use, and the industry estimates it will cost $83 billion to complete that. We applaud the committee's focus on the common goal to enhance the safe delivery of this vital energy resource, and I'm pleased to answer questions on these topics and other topics you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. And our next witness is Mr. Andy Black, who's the president and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines, and he had many productive years here at the Energy and Commerce Committee. And welcome back, Mr. Black, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines.
Is the microphone on?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me better? I'm also testifying on behalf of API. We represent transmission pipeline operators that deliver crude oil, refined products like gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel, and natural gas liquids such as propane. Our U.S. pipelines extend 192,000 miles, safely delivering 14.9 billion barrels of crude oil and energy products a year. Pipelines play a critical role in delivering energy to American workers and families. Americans use the energy our pipelines deliver in their cars and trucks to work or drive on the job. Farmers use propane for rural heating and crop drying. American workers use raw materials like ethane for their good-paying manufacturing jobs. Pipelines are an exceedingly safe way to deliver the energy America needs. The average barrel of crude oil or petroleum products reaches its destination safely, greater than 99.999% of the time. Since 1999, pipeline incidents impacting the public or environment are down 50%. Corrosion-caused pipeline incidents are down 76%, thanks to the widespread use of smart pig inline inspection to detect corrosion in pipes. Pipeline incidents caused accidentally by third-party damage are down 78%. But even with these improvements in pipeline safety over the last 15 years, we know today we need to keep improving pipeline safety further and are committed to doing so. Last year, Liquids pipeline operators spent more than $2.2 billion evaluating, inspecting, and maintaining their pipelines. The spending shows that we are expending a great amount of resources to make pipeline incidents even rarer. I would like to share with you a number of the industry-wide efforts we have underway to improve pipeline safety. 2 years ago, Liquid pipeline operators launched the Pipeline Safety Excellence Initiative. It includes shared pipeline safety principles, such as the goal of zero incidents. Pipeline Safety Excellence also embodies the work of nearly a dozen industry-wide groups to improve pipeline operations and safety. We're funding research and development on new and improved ILI smart pig technologies, developing new best practices to detect and respond to potential cracking in pipes, improving leak detection program management, and ensuring pipeline construction quality management. Strategic initiatives reflect review of safety performance data and lessons learned from pipeline incidents to make safety improvements. While results of the recent California release are not yet available of the investigation, we look forward to understanding the root causes of that incident and addressing any recommendations for safety improvement industry-wide. Our strategic initiatives also reflect lessons from safety investigators and address the recommendations of the NTSB and advisories from PHMSA. One of our most recent safety successes that PHMSA Executive Director Cummings mentioned is a new tool to manage comprehensively and holistically all of the different pipeline safety activities across a company, API Recommended Practice 1173. The NTSB recommended we develop this best practice for pipeline safety management system after the 2010 Marshall, Michigan pipeline release. We embraced NTSB's recommendation and worked together with PHMSA, state regulators, natural gas pipeline operators, and process safety experts over a stretch of 2 years to reach agreement on this important advance in pipeline safety. Over that time, we consulted with safety experts within other industries successfully using safety management systems to improve safety in their sectors. Our members are now planning aggressive implementation of this pipeline safety management system recommended practice because of the opportunity we have to improve pipeline safety industry-wide. Another success story is the work of our emergency response team. Local fire and police departments, especially volunteer departments in rural locations, told us they just didn't have the resources to obtain pipeline-specific emergency response training. We responded to this need by bringing pipeline training to them free of charge through an online course. This and other pipeline emergency response tools can be reached through the website pipelineemergencyresponse.com. For these efforts, I will proudly travel later this month to Nashville in the annual meeting of the National Association of State Fire Marshals to receive their Norm Mineta Excellence in Transportation Safety Award. Presented this year to API and AOPL jointly for the work of our emergency response team, this award is given annually to an individual or team that has made a significant and lasting contribution to the safety of people, products, and materials in transit. Through this award, state fire marshals recognize individuals and teams that have encouraged transportation safety standards above what is required and have worked to ensure the safety of emergency responders. As you can see, there's much work underway to improve pipeline safety performance. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Black. And our next witness is Mr. Carl Weimer, who's the Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust. Thanks for being with us, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Whitfield and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. The Pipeline Safety Trust came into being after a pipeline disaster that occurred in 1999. While prosecuting that incident, the U.S. Justice Department was so aghast at the way the pipeline company had operated and maintained their pipeline and at the lack of oversight from federal regulators that they asked the federal courts to set aside money from the settlement of that case to create the Pipeline Safety Trust as a watchdog organization over both the industry and the regulators. We have been trying to fulfill that vision ever since. Reviewing the implementation of the 2011 Pipeline Safety Act is somewhat difficult because of the many required reports and changes to the regulations have yet to be produced. The slowness of the reporting and rulemaking process seems at odds with the public proclamations of concern and action from the administration. While many are frustrated by this slow progress, it is difficult to know exactly where to lay the blame. PHMSA is partially to blame since they have been slow to produce the required reports and regulation, but they have also been clear with Congress for a number of years now that they lack the resources needed to complete their mission in a timely manner. We also have noted that many times regulations and reports once produced by PHMSA get significantly delayed by the Secretary's office itself or by the White House's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. It would appear there is plenty of blame to be shared for the slowness in implementing many important pipeline safety initiatives. Even with the slowness and delay, progress has recently been made as evidenced by the reduction in the number of pipeline failures that involve both injuries and death to all-time low levels. Unfortunately, at the same time that the number of failures that injure people has been decreasing, the number of significant failures that dump products into the environment and damage property is increasing, as dramatically shown by the recent spill of crude oil into the ocean near Santa Barbara, and the second spill in just a few years of crude oil into the Yellowstone River. This increase in the overall significant failure rate shows that while the focus today may be on PHMSA, ultimately the companies that own and operate these pipelines are the ones that need to be held responsible for their failures. PHMSA has in play a number of significant rulemakings that may very well address many of the key issues that were asked to address in 2011 Act. Expansion of integrity management, leak detection, automated shutoff valves, gas gathering lines, excess flow valves, depth of burial of stream crossings, and verification of maximum allowable operating pressure. We say these issues may be addressed because at this point we really don't know. While PHMSA has started the rulemaking process for many of these issues, for the most of these items, no actual rule or proposed rule has been produced. Some of these efforts started well over 4 years ago, and the exact nature of the holdup is unclear. We ask that you help break this logjam of delay, and if that is not possible, Congress should include these specific rules in the statute as part of the upcoming reauthorization. Congress also asked for non-rulemaking studies and actions in the 2011 Act, which also have not been accomplished. The areas we are most concerned with include the availability of meaningful facility response plans, maps of high consequence areas, a study of the sufficiency of regulations for transport of diluted bitumen, report on excavation damage, and an NTSB requested audit of the integrity management program. The report on gathering lines was recently submitted, but the gathering line issue is of particular importance to us since we see thousands of new miles of gas gathering lines going into the ground every year, with the majority of them being completely unregulated. With the large increase in new pipeline infrastructure in some parts of the country, the aging infrastructure in need of replacement in other areas, and increased complexity of risk-based regulations, we were happy to see Congress provide a significant increase in PHMSA's budget for fiscal year 2015. This budget increase will allow PHMSA to add an additional 100+ new positions targeted at inspections and enforcement, as well as more adequately compensating the states for their pipeline safety programs. It is now your job to ensure that PHMSA effectively expands and manages this increased workforce in ways that help decrease the recent uptick in significant pipeline safety failures. As reauthorization of the National Pipeline Safety Program begins later this year, we would support a straight reauthorization of the current program to allow PHMSA to finally produce all the rules and reports previously requested and address the long list of recommendations from NTSB. For such a straight reauthorization to be successful, Congress needs to remain actively involved in oversight to ensure the administration is doing the things they have been charged with. Thank you again for letting me testify today.
Well, thank you. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Ms. Capps to introduce our final witness.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me this privilege, and it's an honor to welcome our to our panel and to our discussion today Diane Black, who is Assistant Director of Planning and Development for the County of Santa Barbara. And I know that she has worked for the county for 30 years, and in that time has had a lot to do with various regulations having to do with pipeline safety. And in her current role, she has been in the middle of all the spill recovery and response efforts, as well as pipeline safety having to do with our most recent incident in the Gaviota Coast.
Well, thank you, and you're recognized for 5 minutes, Ms. Black.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Whitfield and other members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Diane Black. I'm the Assistant Director of the Planning and Development Department for the County of Santa Barbara in California. I've been involved in the emergency response, permitting, and recovery for the Refugio oil spill, which was the result of a ruptured pipeline onshore in our county. I've overseen the permitting of oil and gas facilities in the county for nearly 20 years, and I've been involved in other oil spill responses, including the Torch oil spill from Platform Irene in 1997. I appreciate being here to share the experiences of Santa Barbara County in the review and permitting of oil and gas projects and associated pipelines. Now the disclaimer. Within the Refugio oil spill response, I may be a decision maker again for either emergency permits or other types of permits, and if that occurs, I'll need to approach each permit application on a case-by-case basis. As a practical matter, that means that today I can provide you with general information, but I can't discuss how I might act on an application without reviewing it and reviewing the public comment associated with it. With respect to the pipeline in Santa Barbara County that recently failed, the County of Santa Barbara entered into a settlement agreement with Celeron Pipeline Company in 1988 concerning the presumption that the county is preempted by federal law from regulating the design and operation of that pipeline. That precluded the county from inspecting operations by and most permitting of what is now known as the Plains All-American Pipeline, the line central to the Refugio spill. For the past decade or more, the county has not prescribed to oil company applicants the construction and safety systems required for inter- and intrastate pipelines. Instead, subsequent to changes in federal law in 2002, the county has evaluated oil and gas projects, including associated pipeline systems, in their entirety as is required under the California Environmental Quality Act. The Federal Pipeline Safety Improvement Act of 2002 does not preempt local jurisdictions in California from their obligations under CEQA. Working with oil company applicants, this has resulted in oil companies in Santa Barbara County routinely including state-of-the-art leak detection and spill prevention technology, including automatic shutoff systems in their project descriptions, which are then analyzed under CEQA. Pipeline systems, which include automatic shutoff systems, minimize the potential impacts from oil spills, including biological, hazardous materials and risk, air quality, and recreational impacts. Within the CEQA process, the County of Santa Barbara does not dictate what equipment oil companies must use in their pipelines in order to minimize impacts from oil spills. Rather, it is the oil companies themselves, through their own engineers, who determine what technology to build into pipeline projects in order to minimize impacts from spills. Automatic shutoff systems rely on pipeline sensors which detect changes in the pressure and flow, which indicate when there may be a problem in the pipeline. When pressure or flow anomalies are detected, the system automatically shuts down the pumps and valves associated with the pipeline to limit the potential release of oil. Automatic shutoff systems are distinguished from remotely operated systems by the fact that automatic shutoff systems do not require human action, decision-making, or intervention to shut down the pipeline system. In other words, there are preset parameters which, if triggered, result in the pipeline system being automatically shut down without any human action. To be clear, the Plains All-American Pipelines, both 901, and which was the subject of the spill, and 903, to which it connects, do not have automatic shutoff systems. With the exception of the Plains pipelines, all of the major transmission pipelines in the county are equipped with automatic shutoff systems. These include all the pipelines that transport oil and gas from the offshore platforms to facilities in Santa Barbara County, and you can see those on the map that I provided for the record. Additional pipelines within the county that are equipped with automatic shutoff systems include, the map that's on the screen, include Line 96, which transports oil from the Elwood onshore facility to Las Flores Canyon, Line 300, the onshore length of the pipeline from Platform Irene to the Lompoc Oil and Gas Plant and on to the Santa Maria Refinery, the Sisquoc Pump Station, which transports oil from the Sisquoc Pump Station to the Santa Maria Pump Station, and a permitted but not yet constructed pipeline in northern Santa Barbara County. Again, all of these automatic shutoff systems were incorporated into the project description for individual projects by oil company applicants prior to environmental review. That concludes my prepared comments, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Black, and thank all of you for your statements, and I'll recognize myself 5 minutes of questions. Ms. Black, before you came today and listened to the testimony of Ms. Cummings, were you aware that 16 of the 42 safety standards in the 2011 bill had not had final regulations issued? Were you aware of that before?
Mr. Chair, I was aware, but only most recently how to become aware of
because of this bill, right?
Correct.
Well, do any of you have any conclusions yourself as to why PHMSA has been not able to complete these safety standards? Okay. All right. Mr. Wise, on gathering lines, I know PHMSA does not require regulations of gathering lines, but some states have decided to regulate those. What has Georgia taken action on that, or?
No, sir, because for the most part, we're not the beneficiary of the opportunity to have gathering lines. We're not,
right.
We're not a fracking state.
Yeah.
But we do think it's important. And again, as I said in my summary, that it's about safety or efficiency or both. And that if you're going to have pipeline safety, that it's important that gathering lines could and should be included if the states choose to enact that level of regulation.
Mr. Santa, do you or Mr. Bradley or Mr. Black have any comments on gathering lines in general?
INGA represents the operators of natural gas transmission pipelines, and in particular interstate transmission pipelines. We do not represent the gathering segment of the industry, so probably that question is best directed to those who represent or in that segment.
Okay. Do you have any additional comments you'd like to make about it, Mr. Black?
Well, oil gathering lines are regulated to some extent by PHMSA if they're in a non-rural setting, if they cross an unusually sensitive area, or exceed a certain diameter. So more liquids gathering regulations.
Do any of you have any idea of what % of all the pipelines in America have these automatic shut-off valves in them? Does anybody have any idea on that? Okay. Do you, Mr. Weimer, have any ideas on that? Okay. They're not required, and I know that PHMSA has conducted a study on this, and I guess as a layman you would think that this would be of benefit, but I keep hearing from technical people that it's not always a benefit. Would anyone have a comment on that? Yeah, Mr. Black.
Liquid pipeline operators recommend and widely use automated, remotely operated shutoff valves so that a trained control room operator can deploy that valve as part of a controlled shutdown of a pipeline. Long-haul, high-pressure liquids pipeline operators generally do not use automatic shutoff valves and don't recommend it because of the pressure surge that can be created from a quick shutoff of an automatic valve that is not part of a planned shutdown. We've analyzed and found 9 releases in the past that are because of conditions similar to an automatic shutoff valve shutting. Found one rupture that put 4,000 barrels of refined products out onto right-of-way. That was caused because of conditions like automatic shutoff valves. So in liquids, long-haul, high-pressure pipelines, automatic shutoff valves are not recommended.
Now, corrosion of pipelines is a major concern, correct? And it's my understanding that in different geographical areas there are different amounts of corrosion. Is that true or is that not true?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's true because a lot of it has to do with the environment within which the pipeline is located, the soil, things of that nature.
And I've heard that in the Santa Barbara area that's prone to a lot of corrosion there. Would anybody be able to confirm that or not? Okay. Okay. Now, would you agree, all of you would agree that pipeline still is the safest way to transport this material? Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yes, sir. You know, and clearly, you know, as I directed in our state, that we have had an aggressive replacement of bare steel and cast iron, and so where we had a very safe program to begin with, it is even safer today. And the one-call program has made it continue to be safer.
Okay.
So it's an extraordinary delivery process.
Right. Okay, Ms. Capps, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and for your testimony, and particularly, of course, my constituent coming all the way from California, and the fact that she testified in a state panel just last week on this topic. And in the wake of the Plains oil spill on May 19th on our shoreline, there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that the Plains All-American, we've touched on it already, the Plains All-American pipeline is not equipped with an automatic shutoff system. And when questioned about this, that particular company echoed the longstanding industry position that such systems are not feasible for oil pipelines. Yet Santa Barbara County has demonstrated this claim is not true. So, Ms. Black, you explained in your testimony that there are numerous pipelines in Santa Barbara County that employ automatic shutoff systems and state-of-the-art leak detection technologies. Would you describe a few of the projects currently using these advanced safety systems in our county?
Yes. I went over those very briefly in my testimony, but I'll repeat it a bit more slowly and emphasize that when I talk about automatic shutoff systems, I really mean the whole system. So I've heard the testimony from oil company representatives that they feel it's not the best practice and that there's some risk involved. That's not been our experience. We've looked at them as a system where the pump is shut off and then valves are shut off sequentially. So I think we really have to talk about it as a system rather than valves. So in Santa Barbara County, in addition to the pipelines that come from the platforms and have shut-off systems, we have several pipelines. Most recently, Line 96, which is associated with the Vanicos platform Holly, transports oil from the Elwood onshore facility to Las Flores Canyon and then ties into the Plains All-American pipeline. That has an automatic shutoff system. Line 300, which is the onshore length of pipeline from Platform Irene to the Lompoc Oil and Gas Plant and then on to the Santa Maria Refinery, has an automatic shutoff system. The Sisquoc Pipeline, which transports oil from the Sisquoc Pump Station to the Santa Maria Pump Station, so pretty much onshore oil, also has an automatic shutoff system. And then we most recently permitted the Fox and Petroleum Pipeline, which was permitted with an automatic shutoff system.
And I'd like to ask these to be submitted for the record, Mr. Chairman. And I wonder, just to follow up briefly, has the use of any of these advanced systems caused any secondary ruptures or other serious problems in the county?
No, not in our entire history with them.
And oil development continues to thrive in the area, am I correct on that?
It does, as you can see from the map, although offshore oil has somewhat declined because the resources do.
And no pipeline operators have gone bankrupt due to the cost of installing these systems, to your knowledge?
No.
Okay. There's also been some confusion regarding the definition of the term automatic. Plains and other companies often refer to their systems as automatic, even though a human operator must still decide to activate. That was the case with Plains. To clarify, the automatic shutoff system installed in Santa Barbara County, the ones you were describing, require no human intervention. Is that correct, just to be clear?
That's correct.
And can you briefly explain how these advanced systems work compared to those on the ruptured Plains pipeline? Why are they so much more effective at detecting and stopping spills?
They're more effective because they don't require human interaction or intervention. They shut off based upon preset parameters, so an operator isn't having to make a decision that
Right.
an actual parameter has been reached.
Now, here's the other thing, and maybe this goes to CEQA, to our local program. While the local companies technically voluntarily install the more advanced systems, it's clear that the law, both state and federal, have played an important role. Can you elaborate on this? I mean, it's kind of like it sets the standard, and everybody kind of gets on board just because the consequences of not doing so. So there's a self-regulatory agency as well. What is the policy mechanism that pushed these companies to proactively include the state-of-the-art technologies in their projects?
Well, the California Environmental Quality Act is a very powerful tool in California. This County of Santa Barbara reviews the whole of every project, whether it's something that's under our direct jurisdiction or not, we review it. And so pipeline companies in Santa Barbara County include in their project descriptions automatic shutoff systems to mitigate upfront the impacts of a potential spill.
I've used up my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and she yields back. And I'd also like to thank our panel today for being here. It's been very informational. Mr. Wise, I think you were here for the testimony when Ms. Cummings was testifying, and she noted that there are issues with getting information from the states in a cost-effective way. Would you speak to the data you work to provide to PHMSA?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do you, Ms. Cummings noted that there are issues with getting information from the states, and in a cost-effective, and getting that information in a cost-effective way. Would you be able to speak to the data that you work to help to provide to PHMSA and their mapping and everything else?
In my role as a commissioner, it's a state commission. We believe that our Office of Pipeline Safety is extraordinary, and they do a great job of getting the information that's requested. And when there's an issue, PHMSA relates it to our staff, and that we respond very quickly to that. And so I believe that we have a good working relationship, that they acknowledge the role that we've played in Georgia to have a very safe delivery system. And I would be surprised to hear that, at least in my state, and haven't heard it from the other states, that there's a problem with information coming from the state commissions.
Let me ask, also in your testimony, that you said that PHMSA has not updated the national pipeline mapping system to include the identification of the high consequence areas. Could you kind of go into that on the high consequence areas and maybe what should be done?
Well, again, there's going to be the high deliverability, and it's an issue that clearly is important to the states and the regulators. And I think it was a question that was asked of one of the representatives, the members today, about releasing that information to the public. And we're not knowledgeable of some of this mapping to this point, and believe it should be released.
Well, thank you. Mr. Black, how do pipeline operators use the inline inspection of the so-called smart pig technology to find problems in the pipelines?
The Smart Pig device travels inside of the pipeline, gathering information about the pipeline as it goes. Uses technology to detect wall thickness and different technologies to determine potential cracks. Then the information that is provided from the onboard computer that has traveled through the pipeline is reviewed. That's raw data. It's terabytes of it that third-party experts, as Director Cummings said, then review, and they determine whether the information that has been provided is just about the natural features of the pipe or is about something that an operator needs to consider addressing. And importantly, also, the Smart Pig vendor and the pipeline company will uncover a section of the pipeline that has been tested and review the results of the inline inspection to field inspections to calibrate the accuracy of the pig. This has succeeded in reducing corrosion-caused incidents by more than 76% over the last 15 years. And corrosion was really the reason for modern integrity management and the advent of this inline inspection technology. It's been proven successful. Got a lot of R&D right now to improve the ability of the machines to sense more, and then the analytics of the people to determine what the machines are telling us.
Thank you. Mr. Santa, could you talk more about the 9-point pipeline safety action plan you mentioned and what INGA has done to educate the public about the safety measures that are undertaken with pipeline projects?
Yes, sir. In the wake of the San Bruno tragedy in 2010, the INGA board committed to a set of voluntary commitments to improve pipeline safety. As I said in my testimony, it was anchored in the goal of 0 incidents as the goal. That 9-point program includes many of the elements that were addressed in the 2011 pipeline safety reauthorization, as well as some of the relevant NTSB recommendations. While I won't go through all of the 9 points, 2 of them to point out is a commitment to expand the use of integrity management beyond high consequence areas. Another one is to perform the testing of pipe where it's necessary to verify the material strength of that pipe. We have engaged in an extensive outreach with pipeline safety stakeholders to keep them abreast of the progress that we are making there. Pipeline companies, as part of their outreach to the public along their corridors, communicate this, and also in connection with new pipeline projects, part of the outreach to the public includes addressing the safety of these systems.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to yield back and recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panel. Very informative. I only have 5 minutes of questions, so I'm a little disappointed. Mr. Cummings, I'm going to start with you. Mr. Weimer, I asked Mrs. Cummings, or Ms. Cummings, to describe the rulemaking process. Her answer was very roundabout, very hard to understand. Is it a transparent process, and is there a good deal of room for improvement in that process?
Yes, we think there's a good deal of room for improvement. Parts of it are transparent when they do the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, and the notice of proposed rulemaking, it opens it up for public comments, and all those public comments are transparent. Where it kind of disappears from that transparency is in the interim. They already, like on the liquid rule that was drafted almost 5 years ago, they went through an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, took lots of public comments, supposedly went back and then wrote a proposed rule, and then it disappeared into the black box somewhere between the Secretary's office and the White House. And that part of the process of where that is and why it's taken so long is, I think, why everybody up here has been frustrated.
And the agency wouldn't have any control over that.
Oh, I think once PHMSA writes the rule and sends it up, it's over their head. So, it's above their pay grade at that point.
Well, you mentioned that Congress should expedite the rulemaking or write rules into the legislation. Now, in my opinion, that would open up a lot of opportunity for legal action, for lawsuits. Wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I think it's probably wise that you're not pipeline engineers and experts, so drafting rules might not be the best for Congress, but there's instances where that's been very successful. In the 2006 Act, you put a rule right in there for excess flow valves that led to millions of excess flow valves being put on new houses being constructed around the country that the NTSB says has saved lives. So there's a few instances where specific rules that are pretty well clarified can be put right into the statute.
Well, thank you. Well, we're seeing an abundance of natural gas production now in this country. Do we have the capacity to manage that safely with minimum leakage and minimum opportunity for accidents?
Well, I think it's a good step forward, the new budget that PHMSA was giving to hire more inspectors and enforcement folks and to help support the states in that too. I think the piece that's missing is the gathering lines that's been talked about when Ms. Cummings talks about 2.6 million miles of pipelines in this country. She isn't including the 200,000 or 300,000 miles of gathering lines that are completely unregulated in most all states.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Black, I'm going to follow up on your smart pig question. Do you think that's the best technology that's out there for inspecting pipes?
Of the methods of conducting integrity management, we have found inline inspection or smart pigs to be the best. So now the research projects are about how to make those pigs more capable and to improve our capability to process that information. We find hydrostatic pressure testing to be very helpful when commissioning a new pipeline for understanding if it's ready for operation.
Is there any technology out there that you think is going to make it easier or cheaper to conduct testing?
Well, it's not getting cheaper to use these. The pigs are getting more specialized. Whereas there used to be one type of pig that did one type of data gathering, now operators are using multiple types of technologies. It means multiple types of inspections or several in the same train inside a pipeline. That's where technology is growing. We're spending a lot of money on research and development in a consortia to try to improve that record further and drive down the number of incidents.
Good. Mr. Santa, you mentioned that there's a need for consistency between voluntary actions and rules. How do you find the cooperation between the agency and the private sector?
Mr. McNerney, as I mentioned in my testimony, INGA and its members have engaged with PHMSA and other stakeholders following the 2011 reauthorization, and we found that to be a good and productive process. And we believe that our input will be reflected in the rules when they are proposed. By the same token, we need that certainty that comes with those proposed rules. And also, as I noted, given the delays that have occurred and that may well continue, getting some items addressed in the reauthorization we think would be constructive.
I just want to say, Mr. Wise, I felt or I detected a lot of frustration in your testimony about the unpublished information that's out there, the delays, and I know you don't have time to answer on my 5 minutes, but I certainly appreciate your comments.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you all very, very much for being here. I asked to the earlier panel about co-location and if they knew of any safety concerns with locating within the same easement. I'll open that up to any of you all. Do you all know of any safety concerns, mainly talking about natural gas? 2 pipelines, one in my district, one just outside of my district, are being built in Virginia or being proposed in Virginia as we speak. Anybody know why they can't co-locate with other gas pipelines or in the same easement footprint? Any safety reasons anybody knows about? Mr. Bradley?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at answering from the perspective of the natural gas distribution companies. We are in the streets with the water departments, with the sewer departments, and many times our infrastructure went in the same time. So you pick a year, 1950, 1940, so we're back together. We do that, we try to go in together to make sure that we minimize the impact on the town, the neighborhood, and we keep costs down by sharing some of the restoration, repave kind of costs. With that being said, it's still important for us to make sure that there is some separation that's acceptable between the infrastructure. So we try to leverage the proximity in local build-up communities, and we do go in, not in the same trench, but in the same street. We just keep the right separation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anybody else want to?
I mean, there are instances where natural gas transmission pipelines are co-located with other infrastructure. For example, sometimes the same corridors as electric transmission lines. There are issues there that need to be addressed in terms of the cathodic protection of the pipelines and things of that nature, so one needs to be mindful of that. But I think pipeline operators look for opportunities to use corridors that already have been used to avoid the disruption and the effects on the communities and the environment.
And assuming that there isn't a safety concern, that would be a wise path, would it not?
For purposes of minimizing disruption, it would be, yes.
Absolutely. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Bradley, do local distribution companies pay user fees for the transmission lines and so forth?
By way of paying for the transmission service, we do
Yes,
pay
sir.
user fees indirectly.
All right.
Yes.
And you mentioned in your testimony that there are several regulations that have just been implemented and need time to work before assessing whether additional changes need to be made to enhance safety. Can you tell me what some of those regulations are?
Did you say that again?
Yes, sir. You said in your testimony there are several regulations that have recently or just been implemented and need time to work before assessing whether additional changes need to be made to enhance safety.
Yeah, thank you. So we're watching the regulations around construction. There's a regulation that was just released around construction around new infrastructure. So, for example, there's a lot of gas main being installed. There's a drive for it, not only from a safety perspective, but from a brand new service to customers perspective. And in doing that, a number of our local distribution companies just aren't staffed for it, so we contract the work out. We want to make sure that the contractors are qualified effectively to do the work. There is a ruling out that we're reviewing right now that speaks to that. We want to make sure that it's going to hit the need that's required for this.
All right. And can you tell me how data is gathered and shared among the industry over time that might be used to enhance regulations in the future or help us figure out what we ought to do?
AGA member companies are involved in a number of activities that support that. So we meet frequently for best practice reviews. We like to check in with each other to figure out who's doing whatever it is best. We look at benchmark data, we see who's got that figured out, whether it's OSHA recordables, whether it's pipeline incidents. We bring people in to meet. One of the big issues that you've heard about is underground damages. So we want to understand the best performer relative to hits per 1,000 ticket calls. We want to bring those in and talk to them. We do that frequently at the American Gas Association. In addition, we do peer reviews, peer-to-peer reviews with our companies.
Well, I do appreciate that. I do have another safety question. One of my constituents has asked, because we're dealing with these pipeline issues, particularly large natural gas pipelines. Right now, they're being told it's safe to drive over them when they put them in the ground. They're being told they can drive over it. Does anybody know of any reason why that would be a problem? Because a lot of my folks are going to harvest timber once every 35 to 50 years. Would that be a problem for a timber truck to drive over one of these, or a fully loaded cattle truck?
Mr. Griffith, I think those kind of issues would be addressed in the design of the pipeline, and there is a very extensive review of that that occurs at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and also as part of that, there is the application of the PHMSA pipeline safety rules during that process. So I do not think there's any reason for undue concern about that.
All right, I appreciate it very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. This time recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weimer, your testimony points to a recent National Transportation Safety Board report on the integrity management of gas transmission pipelines in high-consequence areas. You list 7 areas that the NTSB identified for improvement in these system requirements. Has PHMSA acted on any of these recommendations at this point?
No, they're fairly new regulations, and PHMSA hasn't acted on them. It's another one of those things that may be in some of the regulations they're working on. There was a lot of discussion as the part of the advance notice of proposal rulemaking on both the liquid and the gas side about strengthening some of the integrity management rules. So some of those things may be acted on, but they haven't been acted on yet.
Thank you. And there are several major natural gas pipeline projects either proposed or underway that will pass through my given congressional district. These projects are quite unpopular in the communities that will be hosting them, and my constituents have raised a number of concerns about these projects, including the safety of the pipelines and the associated facilities, compression stations as an example. Also, because these projects will pass through small communities, my concern is that they do not come under the high consequence area designation. For anyone impacted by an accident, there is no such thing as a low consequence area. And it sounds as if the integrity management program isn't achieving the additional safety we would all like to see. So what standards, materials, and technologies are available to ensure greater safety of pipelines and their associated facilities?
Well, I think the integrity management program has achieved some of the things that it was set out to do, and the recent NTSB study that I had mentioned paints that picture that for some time-dependent flaws like corrosion, it's been pretty successful, and NTSB says that in those rural areas that are not currently covered under integrity management or those high consequence areas, expansion of those types of technologies into those areas would help. The problem they saw was that companies aren't really integrating other types of risks into their integrity management very well. It's helped with some things, but not across the board.
Mm-hmm. And your testimony indicates that significant incidents are increasing on pipelines in high consequence areas. And apparently excavation is one of the main causes of significant pipeline incidents. So I gathered from Mr. Cummings' response to my question to her about or Ms. Cummings' response to my question to her about whether PHMSA has accurate and complete maps of pipeline locations, that the answer is no.
Yeah, and that's one of the rules they're working on, strengthening that national pipeline mapping system. The current plus or minus factor on a lot of that maps is plus or minus 500 feet. So the pipeline could be, you know, on the other side of the road or a different side of the neighborhood than where it shows on their maps.
And to the impacted communities, that's a relevant situation.
Right, but the one thing to mention is that those maps should never be used for excavation. You know, if you really are going to go in and dig, you need to call 811 to get a really accurate location of where the pipeline is.
And I think it's easy to calculate that the efforts of PHMSA to communicate with local authorities about how to avoid excavation damage is handicapped by that lack of information. Frankly, this is shocking. At a minimum, we should know the location of the existing networks. Would this information help to avoid the problems we are seeing with excavation damage to pipelines?
Well, I think more accurate maps would help give people an idea where the pipelines are in their area, but really the way to get at the excavation damage is just for everybody to really understand that 811 call before you dig. That's the accurate system that's going to really keep people safe.
And is it a resource problem when it comes to accurate mapping, or are there other barriers that face us in obtaining or organizing this information?
Yeah, I think to some degree it's a resource problem. I've heard the industry talk about how expensive it would be to go out and GIS their pipelines to more accurate. You know, lots of companies have already done that, but other companies haven't.
Do the states do a better job?
The states, this is really a federal regulation of the NPS mapping, so it falls on PHMSA.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I say I've exhausted my time.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. We were waiting for Mr. Green, who I was told was on his way. Mr. Weimer, one other question I would just like to ask you. You had mentioned in your opening statement that the Pipeline Safety Trust was funded originally through the Department of Justice in a court case. I was curious, your funding today, is that through private donations, or how's that done today?
Well, luckily, the board members of the Pipeline Safety Trust, who were the families originally that lost their children in that explosion, invested that money very wisely. So we received $4 million from the Justice Department to create the trust. I think we have $4.4 million of it today. So to a large degree, we live off that wise investment. And we also do get some grants, and we run an annual national conference that brings in some money also.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. Oh, Mr. Green's appeared. So at this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Wise, PHMSA has not published any information pertaining to valves, integrity management, or leak detection. Can you explain what steps the Georgia Public Service Commission can and has taken to address these issues without PHMSA action?
We're very interested both in my state and the National Association on this information. We think it's vital to understand the impact and the potential rate structure, the impact on the LDCs, and the customers that pay their bills.
Okay. In your testimony, you mentioned gathering lines. Can you explain your position on the issue of what PHMSA needs to do to fulfill its responsibilities?
We believe the review should be left to the individual states as to the level of scrutiny and inspection of gathering lines. PHMSA should respond to that request. Georgia's not going to be one. We don't have gathering lines. But I think a number of states, for safety and integrity of the system, we should have some level of review.
Okay. Obviously, in Texas, we have no shortage of gathering lines. Mr. Wilmer, it seems that PHMSA is focused on public awareness but hasn't accomplished much by way of regulation. It seems that the industry's done quite a bit to address pipeline safety even without PHMSA. What are your thoughts on the industry actions?
Yes, public awareness has been a hard nut to crack, and the industry has spent tens of millions of dollars on it. There's regulations that require the industry to reach out to a variety of stakeholders, the public, local public officials, or emergency responders, but there's no requirement on the other end that the local governments pay attention. So to some degree, the industry's been pushing out a lot of information, but falling in the hands of people that are way too busy already, and it's not being paid attention to enough. Somehow we need to learn to message better to all those local governments so they pay attention instead of waiting until something happens like in Santa Barbara, and then all of a sudden they're paying lots of attention.
Well, it's frustrating, though, because I think I've been on the committee for about 3 or 4 pipeline reauthorizations, and this is, say 4 years from when we last did it, and they still haven't gotten most of the requirements that we wanted done in 2011. Do you think 2 additional years would provide PHMSA the appropriate amount to finalize these outstanding policies?
I think it would provide them enough time to get most of that done. You know, it sounds like a lot of the new rules are about to roll out. Once the rule comes out, there's going to be another year for the public, for all the stakeholders to comment and for them to redraft the rule. So we're not going to really know what is and isn't in these rules for a couple of years one way or another at this point.
Yeah. Mr. Stanton, in your testimony you discussed the PHMSA user fee. What benefits would increased assessments provide?
Mr. Green, the user fee offsets the cost of the PHMSA program and also is the source of a lot of the funds that PHMSA provides to the states in the form of state grants. And I know that Mr. Wise in the testimony on behalf of NARUC made the case for even more funding there. I think the point raised by Inga in our testimony had to do with the equity of the way the user fee is structured by statute, that it's collected only from natural gas transmission pipeline operators, when in fact the large majority of the funds collected via that fee are used for other purposes. And we raised questions as to whether or not this still legitimately constitutes a user fee. We pointed out that the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Bill highlighted this issue. So I think it is an effective mechanism to fund the program. However, the equity of it in terms of the collection and the beneficiaries is something I think that needs to be addressed both as a matter of policy and also to continue to satisfy the law.
Would that be something we could do in a pipeline safety reauthorization?
Yes, sir, I believe it is. It is something that in that language in the Senate Appropriations Bill, they noted that it was something for the authorizing committees to address.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm going to be brief. I just have a question for Ms. Black. Mrs. Black, I want to thank you for being here, and all of our thoughts and prayers are with you in the Santa Barbara area as you continue to deal with the spill that caused so very much damage to your community. What was your initial reaction when you heard that Plains America, the same owners of the pipeline that ruptured in Santa Barbara just 2 months ago, was also responsible for another, although smaller leak in Illinois this past weekend? And are you satisfied with the corrective action that PHMSA imposed on Plains America? And lastly, do you feel that there's more to be done, either from the standpoint of information sharing, regulatory authority, additional resources, or any other area that could help empower local communities and help prevent future disasters?
That was a long question.
Yes, it was.
So I'll try to piece it apart and answer.
Yes, ma'am.
Please feel free to follow up if I miss pieces of it. So reaction, I felt sorry for the community that also suffered. So that was really my personal reaction. In terms of satisfaction with the corrective order, I'll let you know. It depends on what sort of process is undertaken to recommission Line 901. I'm satisfied that it's shut in right now. I'm satisfied that Plains has not recommissioned Line 903, at least as to the Sisquoc pump station. So I'm satisfied with that right now, but I don't, I'm concerned about recommissioning that line without having the protection systems in place that are in place for other pipelines within the county. So I would be very satisfied if an automatic shutoff system were put into place on that pipeline. And I'd be very satisfied to see the smart pig results and the interpretation of those results to see if there are other issues within the line.
So you, the company, are you satisfied then with the level of responsibility that the company assumed, that Plains America assumed, and their subsequent actions in Santa Barbara? Were they strong actions, corrective actions?
So the response in Santa Barbara County so far has really been cleanup efforts. And yes, I think that under Unified Command, Plains has done a good job of addressing cleanup concerns. What we haven't seen yet is the recommissioning efforts. What's going to happen when that pipeline is put back into service, and what sorts of systems will be in place then.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, these witnesses have been in the chair for a long time. You've been in the chair for a long time. So in the interest of time, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
You know what? You're a fine gentleman.
I thought so. I thought so.
Well, I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today. We do value your input, and as we move toward reauthorization, of course, your comments will be useful. I'm also inserting into the record at the request of Ms. Capps the corrective action orders from the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to the Plains Pipeline Company without objection. And then we'll keep the record open for 10 days for any additional materials. I know that one of the Democratic members had asked to submit some questions, I think, to Ms. Cummings, so that will be done as well. But thank you all. We look forward to working with you as we move forward. And thanks for coming all the way from California and Washington State. And with that, the hearing is dismissed. Adjourned. Over.
A long time.